with that, I'll turn it over to Brad Cole, who's the IML Executive Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning to all of you, each of you individually and collectively. It's nice to be here in the city of Urbana. I am Brad Cole, the Executive Director of the Illinois Municipal League, and we're pleased to be able to provide some newly elected officials training and information to you. It's a little different than what we ordinarily do, but we thought this would be helpful because so many new members were elected to this council. And as you're going to be sworn in and beginning your duties, the information that we'll provide to you today will be helpful. So you will hear from several of our staff, each on a different topic. We'll be talking about the basics of municipal government. We'll be talking about the Open Meetings Act and providing a certificate of completion, which is required for your participation with that. We'll be talking about ethics and conflicts of interest. We'll provide a legislative update, and we'll be answering any questions along the way that you have about any of those topics and anything else. At your seat, you've found a stack of publications, and many of the topics that we'll cover in the presentations will be referencing some of those publications. In the folder, the packet, there is other information that's contained that we'll also reference. So some fact sheets and also the slide deck presentations are in there. So if you want to follow through each one of them as they proceed, you can make notes on that. Lots of information. It can be overwhelming, but for those of you that have served a year or more, you know that you're always going to be learning. The intent today is to give you a good overview of what you will want to know about and what you may have questions about. We are a resource for you. The City of Urbana is a member of the Illinois Municipal League. There are presently 1,298 municipalities in Illinois. You'll hear that number a little bit later with a slight variation. We are a membership organization in just about every community. All but a handful are members of IML. So we appreciate your membership. And what we do is provide for each of you as elected officials and for the appointed officials whatever we can to help you with your job. So that may be education like today, it may be advocacy, which you'll hear about in the legislative process, and it may be empowering you as local officials to be able to do your jobs better. So we're pleased to be here, and I think it'll be a good morning. In the packet is a green piece of paper that I will be collecting at the end of the day, which is a survey of how we did. That will represent the quiz that you have to take. So it shouldn't be too painful, but if you want to complete that as you go through, I will be trying to collect that at the end of the day. First up for us is Cassie Good. Cassie is in our legislative department, and she's going to talk to you about the basics of municipal government. And then each person thereafter will be introduced, and we'll talk about the subject that they are most familiar with. As I indicated, the presentation is in your packet in hard copy and will be presented on the screen as a part of the PowerPoint. So thank you, Mayor, and thanks to each of you for being here, and we look forward to the day.
Good morning. My name is Cassie Good. I'm the Legislative Liaison for the Illinois Municipal League. Congratulations to all of you, and thank you for having us this morning. I'll be presenting to you the basics of municipal government. As newly elected officials, you have goals and campaign promises to keep and a list of issues to address. However, this presentation is not intended to advise you about the wisdom or practicality of your goals and aspirations, but rather to familiarize you with your new role as an elected official so that you're better equipped to meet those goals. Situated here. So let's start with the basics. Illinois is made up of nearly 7,000 units of local government, more than any other state in the country. There are 102 counties, 1,298 cities, villages, and incorporated towns, although this number will be changing to 1,296 as Cahokia, Centerville, and Allerton, located in the Metro East area, will be consolidating into one community, which will be known as Cahokia Heights. Other types of units of local government include libraries, school districts, township governments, road districts. Another interesting point I'd like to make is that Urbana also sits as a township, and that is unique as not too many other communities do this. Units of local government are governed by the United States Constitution, federal legislation, the Constitution of the State of Illinois, state legislation, and local ordinances. The Illinois Municipal Code is the fundamental state statute governing municipalities. This is the primary statute for municipalities looking for guidance, authority, and direction on how to conduct most operations of municipal government. Additionally, your municipality has adopted a municipal code that consists of ordinances specific to your municipality that must be reviewed and followed when making any and all decisions. It's important that you familiarize yourself with Urbana's ordinances and their content. Municipal governments are typically responsible for their infrastructure, regulation of land use, zoning and buildings, traffic, health, environmental cleanliness, businesses and parking, and services such as police and fire, animal control, parks and recreation, streets, and so on. A critical function of municipal government is the approval of an annual budget to fund these services, which we'll discuss a little bit more in this presentation. A key distinction that guides a municipality's ability to address these responsibilities is its status as either being home rule or a non-home rule government. In Illinois, home rule status refers to the state constitutional authority of local governments to self-govern, provided that the General Assembly does not explicitly limit that power or maintain the exclusive exercise authority in a specific area. The city of Urbana is one of the 218 home rule communities in the state. This number recently changed from 217 as Savoy recently passed a referendum, now making it a home rule community. In Illinois, municipalities with a population of more than 25,000 automatically become a home rule unit, although this could be rejected by referendum. Constituents may also vote for a smaller community to become a home rule unit through the referendum process. Home rule is based on the belief that some problems are inherently local and that the government that is closest to the people is best suited to deal with these issues. Being a home rule community allows for custom-tailored solutions as they have more flexibility than non-home rule communities in areas such as creating local regulations or codes, developing impact fees, bonding authority, using design-build contracts, and taxing both residents and non-residents. While home rule governments have the autonomy to address local problems with local solutions, they can also achieve broad goals through cooperation with other governmental units. The competent administration of local government involves working together. Intergovernmental cooperation may be defined as an agreement between two or more governments for achieving common goals, providing a service, or solving a mutual problem. Examples of intergovernmental cooperation could include shared library services, police and fire protection, emergency medical services, and shared government buildings. Intergovernmental cooperation can result in cost savings, efficiency, and sharing of resources and ideas that could benefit all. It is wise to seek out opportunities for cooperation and shared interests with your neighboring and overlapping governments. Now that we've discussed the general purpose and powers of municipal governments, I'd like to go over the roles and responsibilities of municipal officials such as yourself, whose commitment to public service is critical to a municipality's success. The city of Urbana operates under a mayoral, aldermanic form of government. A city council consists of the mayor, 7 aldermen elected for 4-year terms as provided by state law. As city council members, you act as the legislative branch to the city, as the mayor acts as the executive branch. It's important that you understand your roles and responsibilities as a city council member. The City Council is instrumental in establishing laws and ordinances for citizen welfare, as well as determining policies that govern municipal services and the approval of mayoral appointments. Per Urbana City Code, as elected officials of the City of Urbana, your terms will begin the first regular or special meeting in the month of May following the election. The mayor is the executive chief of the city. The mayor chairs city council meetings and works with the council to implement goals, plans, standards, and policies, and represents the city on intergovernmental boards and activities. The mayor is responsible for appointing officials, staff, and members of the city boards and commissions with the approval of the city council. According to Urbana's city code, there may be appointments made annually and whenever vacancies occur in certain offices by the mayor with the approval of the city council. A few examples are the city administrator, police and fire chief, or the finance director, or such other employees as the mayor or the city council may from time to time deem necessary. Additionally, the mayor serves as the local liquor commissioner, although they may appoint someone else to assist them in that role. By state law, municipalities have the power to legislate liquor licenses and fees. The local liquor commissioner may grant, suspend, and revoke licenses, authorize enforcement activity, and receive complaints from citizens. The council, however, generally has control over the total number of licenses and rules governing licensing. By the very nature of the office, the city clerk receives all communications addressed to the municipality or governing body. The city clerk is required to attend all meetings of the city council and keep a full journal of its proceedings. The city clerk is not only responsible for record management, but also to meet all legal notices for meetings, to serve as the clerk to the city council, and to assist the county clerk in conducting elections. The city clerk also serves as the lead Freedom of Information Act officer for the city of Urbana, and also the custodian of the municipal seal. One thing to note is that all retained documents must be filed in the office of the clerk. One resource that the city clerk may find useful is the IML-produced monthly review magazine. In addition to a broad scope of articles and features containing information of both general and specific interest to municipalities, the review magazine provides monthly municipal officials' statutory duties and requirements, along with a complete annual calendar published in December. The role of the city administrator is to aid and assist the mayor in the formulation and development of policies, procedures, and programs as established by the mayor and the city council, and to supervise and administer the implementation of these policies, programs, and procedures. A city administrator makes recommendations to the mayor for the appointment of all department and division heads that are subject to appointment. The city administrator directs the general operations and business of all departments and divisions of the city. The city administrator also provides for communications with the city among the various departments and divisions, and assists the mayor in the enforcement of all laws and ordinances within the municipality. While the city of Urbana has a city administrator, the city of Champaign has a council manager form of government and therefore has a city manager. The difference between these roles are that the city administrator's obligations and duties are determined by the mayor and the city council through ordinances, whereas a city manager's duties are defined in part by statute. Members of the city of Urbana's boards and commissions are generally appointed by the mayor and are confirmed by the city council. All board, commission, and committee meetings are open to the public. According to Urbana's city code, the city council shall elect one of its members as mayor pro tem who, while remaining in office, shall continue to serve as mayor pro tem until another member is elected and assumes the duties. If a temporary absence or disability of the mayor incapacitates the mayor from the performance of his or her duties, but does not create a vacancy in the office, the mayor pro tem shall perform the duties and possess all rights and powers of the mayor according to state law. The city of Urbana's city code also provides for the order of succession for the mayor pro tem in the event the mayor or the mayor pro tem are temporarily absent or incapacitated. Now that we have discussed the roles of various municipal officials, I'd like to touch on city council meetings. The critical work of municipal government typically begins or occurs at its regularly scheduled meetings. You are now one of the members of the corporate authorities of the city of Urbana. Much of what a municipality does will require direction and authorization by your council. One key to a successful term will be to be learning to use meetings to develop effective policy, form your decision-making process, and to ensure theory and debate are translated into actions and results. State law requires that government business be conducted in the sunshine, with its work and proceedings open to the public. The Open Meetings Act defines the gatherings that are subject to this requirement. Patrick Hayes, IML's General Counsel, will cover the Act's provisions and how to comply with its terms in the next presentation. While different municipalities perform many of the same functions, they do so in different ways. Some local governments have developed procedures over years out of tradition. However, one priority for all local governments should be to have efficient and timely meetings. While clear agendas are required by state law, it is good practice to use them to specifically identify your goals and objectives for each meeting. The agenda should be specific and list the topics that will be discussed in a manner sufficiently clear to put the public on notice on matters that will be considered for final action during the meeting. If clarification of the meeting is necessary, the chair in the meeting should call for those modifications or changes in the order of business at the beginning of the meeting. Once the agenda is set at the beginning of the meeting, it should not be altered. A consent agenda is an efficient tool permitted by Illinois law, which assembles all agenda items that do not require special consideration or discussion. They may be voted on in a single up or down vote with one motion. Consent agendas include items such as expenditure of funds, approval of minutes, and passage of non-controversial resolutions and motions to receive or accept documents. Items remain on the consent agenda by unanimous consent. Prior to the vote, the chair should give the opportunity for members to remove an item. Otherwise, all items should be voted on as a group. An agenda must be published at least 48 hours prior to the meeting, and final action can only be taken on items listed on that agenda. Public comment, or sometimes referred to as public input, is essential to good governance. According to Urbana City Code, any person seeking to address the members of a commission, committee, or other body of the city at a public meeting will be permitted to speak on any matter listed on the agenda or of public concern. Prior to speaking, each person must be recognized and must state their full name for the record. The city code limits public participation to no more than 5 minutes per person and no more than 2 hours per meeting, unless extended by consent of the majority vote of members present. Per the city code, if there are more than 20 individuals desiring to speak, public comment may be limited to 3 minutes per person. In the event a group wishes to address members on the same subject matter, the code suggests a spokesperson be chosen to represent the group. If other members of the group wish to address the body, a limit of persons may be applied, and they may be limited to present only information that has not already been presented by the spokesperson. Such limitations should be exercised with care, patience, and without bias on a case-to-case basis and clearly articulated. The chair and council members may, as necessary and appropriate, question or ask for clarification of those presenting comments. Keep in mind that this is a public input period and not a public debate period, and you are not obligated to answer all questions of the speakers. Some communities, like the City of Urbana, use a committee of the whole system. Committee of the whole meetings provide the opportunity for members of the council to participate in discussion without voting upon issues prior to a full meeting where the council will take formal action on items. Newly elected officials often ask whether something needs to be done by motion, resolution, ordinance, or proclamation. Policy decisions are generally made through a deliberative process, so it's important that you know and become familiar with these basic motions. However, please note that not every municipality operates identically. Therefore, in this section, we will cover only the basics. Here are a few mechanisms in order to pass your local legislation. An ordinance is used to pass a new law or regulation. Some ordinances are required by state law, and only an ordinance can amend an ordinance. You'll be called upon to review questions about sign ordinances, traffic rules, building codes, and whether to impose a ban on parking on snow days and the alike. In many ways, these local ordinances are the ones that most directly impact the daily lives of your residents. Local ordinances are the starting point for the routine business or regular council meetings, committee structures, regulations, and controlling local issues. Most municipal codes deal with a substantial range of issues from business licenses, animals, building codes, motor vehicle and traffic regulation, fire and police, and everything else that has been considered and approved by a municipal ordinance. A resolution is issued by the City Council and usually authorizes specific one-time action. For example, a resolution would be used to approve a contract, award a bid, accept a report, or make an appointment. A proclamation is issued by the mayor and does not have binding effect or function of law, nor do they authorize a specific action, but rather use to state the intent or feelings of a specific issue. Motions are a parliamentary procedure that is used to get an item on the table for discussion. Whether that item is an ordinance, a resolution, or an action, such as authorizing the approval of the purchases of new lawnmowers. Members of the City Council are responsible for making motions, seconding motions, debating on motions, and voting on motions. Motions must be seconded to be voted on. When making a motion, observe common courtesy, allow the last speaker to finish, and wait for the chair to recognize you. In your packet, you will find a parliamentary procedure guide that covers a variety of motions and proper procedure. However, keep in mind that each community is different and there could be a variance in practice. During a voice vote, the chair will ask for ayes and nays. Any member may vote for an exact count or roll call. During a roll call vote, each member is called by name. Acceptable responses during a roll call vote are aye, nay, abstain, or present. A few things to consider prior to voting. Think about what a law or ordinance will look like in implementation. Ask basic questions before regulating. Consider how many residents will be affected. Ask how the proposal will help. Be aware of the costs. Ask if the proposal makes the community more desirable. And when in doubt, we recommend that you utilize your legal guidance and consult with your experts. Some projects have an enormous impact on your community that is of strategic importance. So it's crucial to have these projects carefully reviewed. As you enter your career as a government official, never forget that local government is subject to what is known as the Sunshine Laws. So we will briefly cover the Freedom of Information Act, commonly known as FOIA, and the Local Records Act. FOIA is designated to ensure that the public is given access to documents used by local governments in their function and decision-making. All public records of these local governments are subject to FOIA, regardless of their form, electronic or paper, and regardless of whether they produced the documentation or if it came into their control in some other manner. This means that not only are your agendas, records, letters, and completed research reports subject to FOIA, but so are your emails, instant messages, along with maps, photographs, and other documented materials. It's not generally relevant if you send a message from your home or place of business. If it is in the conduct of government business, it is subject to FOIA. Your public body must make these available to any party requesting records for inspection. Only a number of documents are exempt from FOIA, including, but not limited to, exceptions for privacy, such as preserving a social security number or some police records, such as a juvenile record. Security, drafts, trade secrets, and competitive information, attorney advice, and certain real estate and labor negotiations are also exceptions. Generally, municipal staff will handle FOIA responses. An exhaustive discussion of FOIA is beyond the scope of this presentation. So this is a reminder that with only a few exceptions, most of what you say, do, and write in your capacity as a public official will be subject to public review. Another law, the Local Records Act, creates certain rules regarding which documents must be retained. It is unlawful to destroy records without authority. Your municipality should have a policy in place to ensure that the correct documents are retained, and it would be worth your while to review it. Local governments need revenue to pay for programs and services. The principal sources of revenue for municipalities are property taxes, including special service area and special assessment taxes, sales and use taxes. A municipality's home rule status determines the process for imposing a local sales tax. Home rule municipalities, like Urbana, are able to impose a local sales tax by passing an ordinance levying the new sales tax rate. Personal property replacement taxes, also known as PPRT, are revenues collected by the state of Illinois and paid to local governments. These revenues replace funds lost by local governments after personal property taxes were eliminated in the 1970 Constitution. Motor fuel tax, commonly known as MFT, is the tax on the privilege of operating motor vehicles upon public highways and operating recreational watercraft upon waters of Illinois. The tax is based on the consumption or purchase of motor fuel. The funds of which a municipality receive are through the state based on a formula based on population. Municipalities throughout Illinois utilize motor fuel tax revenues to fund critical infrastructure projects in their cities, towns, and villages. Motor fuel tax funds can be used for including, but not limited to, constructing and maintaining roads, traffic control, street lighting, storm sewers, or bike paths. Other revenue sources include state income taxes and the local government distributive fund, commonly known as LGDF. LGDF is a designated portion of state income tax revenues. Cities and counties currently receive a percentage of total state income tax revenues through this fund on a per capita basis. In addition to funding everyday core services for Illinois citizens, LGDF distributions play a role in keeping the local tax burden low. Without LGDF, communities across Illinois would need to explore increases to other fees or taxes, including property taxes, or cutting important programs. Later in this presentation, you will hear more about LGDF and the governor's proposed budget and the legislative update given by IML's Director of Legislative Affairs, Mitchell Remmert. Other municipal sources of revenue are utility and cable television fees. Municipalities also have other less significant revenue streams, such as fines, license fees, grants, and impact fees. In your packets, there are fact sheets enclosed explaining many of these revenue sources. Additionally, in the IML's review magazine, municipal revenue estimates are published quarterly. A critical function of municipal government is the approval of the annual budget to fund these services, which we will discuss next. Annually, the City Council passes a budget ordinance setting forth anticipated and estimated expenditures and levy money. Your annual budget cycle must comply with certain state-required dates and actions. The City of Urbana's fiscal year begins on the first day of July of each year and ends on the 30th day of June of each year. The finance director is responsible for, including but not limited to, establishing the use of efficient planning, budgeting, auditing, reporting, accounting, and other fiscal management procedures. The finance director examines all books and records of each department, commission, and board, examines money received by the city and paid out by the city, its debts, and compiles the annual budget. The passage of the annual budget ordinance is done by the City Council with the approval of the mayor. It must be adopted before the beginning of the fiscal year to which it applies. The City of Urbana's municipal year coincides with its fiscal year. Subsequent to the passage of the annual budget ordinance, an ordinance shall be passed establishing the property taxes to be levied for the fiscal year. Such ordinance shall establish the property taxes as may be required by the approved annual budget ordinance and shall be known and referred to as the tax levy ordinance. At least one public hearing should be held on the proposed annual budget ordinance prior to the final approval of it. The proposed annual budget ordinance should be conveniently available for public inspection at least 4 days prior to the public hearing of the annual budget ordinance. Notice of the availability for inspection of the proposed annual budget ordinance should be given by publication in a newspaper having a general circulation in the city for at least 14 days prior to the time of the public hearing of the annual budget ordinance. Another major municipal component is the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is an advisory zoning document. However, it does not have control of the land use of specific parcels. The importance of the comprehensive plan lies with the fact that it is the foundation upon which municipalities build their land use regulations, such as zoning and subdivision ordinances. The Illinois Municipal Code gives a Plan Commission Board authority to create, amend, and implement a comprehensive plan as land is developed both in and outside municipal boundaries. By law, a comprehensive plan must be considered by the Plan Commission of a municipality and then reviewed by the corporate authorities for consideration. Generally, the elements of the plan address future land uses such as agricultural, business, industrial, and residential uses such as estates, single-family housing, and high-density areas. Elements of the plan include depiction of future transportation networks, including roads and train stations, and even the parking for the train station. A comprehensive plan is the foundation of a community's land use regulations. Now is an excellent time to start thinking of your community's comprehensive plan, as municipalities are required to periodically update these. As an elected official, you now represent the city of Urbana and not just yourself. You must remain mindful that in your day-to-day interactions and your decisions. You must also keep in mind that your primary responsibility is to represent the constituents' best interest. Many communities fail to anticipate change. It is often the case that a municipality is reacting to the immediate needs and circumstances, but fails to be proactive in planning its own destiny. There is no substitute to carefully planning your community's future. Meet with local businesses to determine their needs, their concerns, and what they wish the city of Urbana would do for them. Much of politics is relationships, so be fair and work as a team. Whether you share the same outlook on issues or policies, you will be spending the next several years working together. Respect differing opinions. Reasonable people can disagree without being disagreeable. Serving as an elected official is complex, demanding, and challenging, all while being extremely rewarding. So enjoy it. And now I'd like to provide you with a few resources you may find valuable as you navigate your new role as a newly elected official. The Illinois Municipal League provides numerous resources for the benefit of our member municipalities and their officials. A few examples of what we provide, such as our fact sheets, are enclosed in your packets. Additionally, IML produces a monthly review magazine, as previously stated. The magazine provides monthly municipal official statutory duties and requirements, along with a complete annual calendar that is published in December. IML has an extensive library of informative publications, as you can see in front of you. You've received several of those today, to include the IML Handbook for Newly Elected Officials. This publication goes further into the basics we covered today, along with some of the more complex issues you may face as a newly elected official. IML offers a range of educational training services to our members throughout the year. IML produces several e-newsletters to include a weekly Statehouse briefing, a monthly legal bulletin, and a monthly federal focus. If you're not currently signed up for these, there's a contact information form in your packet that provides you with the option to sign up, or you can do so on iml.org/subscribe. The IML Annual Conference is the municipal event of the year, where more than 2,000 registrants are offered unparalleled access to education and professional development, as well as an opportunity to network with fellow elected officials. This year's annual conference will be September 23rd to September 25th. The IML website, iml.org, has an abundance of information, which includes links to many sites that you may find useful in your new role. As previously stated, the intent here is not to give you an exhaustive legal track exploring every municipal issue in detail, but to give you some insight on the process and duties of your new responsibility of being an elected official. I hope you found this presentation helpful and informative. Thank you all for your time, and good luck in your new endeavors, and I will take whatever questions you may have.
James.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. My first question is if there's guidance either from the state or from the practices of this body, so I'm looking over this way, for abstentions. Is there a requirement that if an official abstains that they explain the reason for their abstention?
Okay. Thank you for that question, but I'll refer to Brad on that.
Okay, so
Please use the microphone.
Yeah.
So everyone can hear.
I think I'll bring another chair over here for later, but I was just going to note that if you thought that was exciting, wait till we get to the Open Meetings Act part. So a lot of this is just information, and we want to encourage questions, and so I appreciate that. Abstentions are up to the individual. So if you have a conflict that you believe is present, it either is a real or perceived conflict, then you have the obligation to state that there is or may be such a conflict and that you're going to abstain from the discussion and the vote. Once you have done that, then you cannot be involved in the discussion. That means at all. So you can't make a motion or second the motion, and you can't comment on anything. And then when the vote is made, you would just abstain. So it is best to do that at the front of the process. But if you haven't done that at the front of the process, as long as you have not participated in the discussion, you can do it at the end before you vote, basically explaining why you're abstaining before you vote. But it is best to do that up front. And it's up to you if you believe you have a conflict, or if your legal counsel or your private attorney has told you have, then that's your point to make.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of, but it sounds like a council person could abstain because they don't want to render an opinion at the time the vote is being called. They don't have to explain that?
If you don't have a conflict, it's really an abstention is a possible vote, but you could also just vote present. Each council has a different set of rules. They may or may not address it here. I don't know if you have anything that addresses what the proper votes are, but it's either an aye or a nay. If you don't wish to vote, you can vote present, I assume, or you can abstain, but an abstention really is that if there is a conflict.
Okay.
We can provide details on that.
Okay, and then my second question, with regard to destruction of records, is email by council members about council business or city business or texts considered records that need to be preserved in that no destruction of records?
And we'll get into a little bit of that next, but I believe that each of you will have a city email address. That will be your official email address, and that's where you should conduct all of your city business. All of that will then be maintained and preserved by the city in accordance with the Local Records Act. And the short answer then is yes. Now, your text messages and things like that, if they're on your private phone, may be recoverable or discoverable later if necessary, but you really should not use your personal means of communication for city business. And the purpose being so that if they are ever required to be produced, that they can be produced by the city. But they are public records if you are conducting public business and using those means for that purpose.
So, and just a nuance to that, since many of us will publish our cell phone number as a way to contact us to the public, does that put that into that realm?
Well,
I know this is the subject of litigation in the past. I just want to clarify it to today's understanding.
It's an excellent point to clarify. So if you publish your cell phone number, certainly somebody can call you. I would suggest that if you get a text message that enters into something that is a little more detailed than are you going to the event at the park this weekend, that you should say, I would prefer that we have this exchange through my city email address and provide that. Now, how convenient is that? Because many of us are easily in the texting communication mode. But you should remember that if you begin using your private phone for those official communications, then you are going to open that up to possible discovery or FOIA. And so you should just, if somebody wants to engage in a general conversation as a citizen, that's okay. But if you're starting to talk about city business, like, well, we're going to be doing this at the council meeting, and how do you think I should vote? And I don't know what, I've talked to other aldermen, then you should refer them to your city email address or just talk to them.
Great, thank you.
Grace?
I had another one just to clarify some of the city structure as far as the city clerk and FOIA. Did I hear in some of the meetings that or some aspects of FOIA changed to legal department? Is that right? But she's still.
Yeah, there were a couple of items, thanks for bringing that up. There were a couple of items that we needed to clarify. The city code that you found probably online has not been updated to reflect some ordinances and changes that were made. So one of those is related to public input guidelines. The council passed an ordinance just recently which changed public input time limits to 4 minutes instead of 5 in a total of 1 hour. And then for our FOIA officer, it's true that the city clerk serves as the FOIA requests come to the city clerk's office and go out from the city clerk's office, but in between we have a FOIA officer, in fact he's in the back of the room here, Ross McNeil, our paralegal, who quarterbacks the FOIA requests, and now we have a smooth flow for FOIA requests.
And so if I may, that is very common, and it is not uncommon also to have separate FOIA officers in individual departments, primarily in public safety. So you may have a FOIA officer in the police department, and then that would run up through your process. With 1,298 different communities in Illinois, everybody does it a little bit differently. So this is the high-level overview, and obviously we didn't have quite the up-to-date version, but that is very common. That is not out of the ordinary, and in fact is recommended. So I would say you're doing it properly.
Yeah, and I would add we do have within each department, Ross will send out the request, and then within each department, folks are responsible for gathering the required emails and documents, send them to Ross, and then he sends them ultimately back to the city clerk's office for sending on to the requester.
And if I may, just to kind of talk ahead on a related but separate topic, you're going to hear about a legislative update later. You may find from us at some point we're opposed to Freedom of Information Act legislation. And you may think, well, golly, why are you opposed to that? We're just providing public information to the public. Well, it is a massive unfunded mandate. And so we may oppose an issue because it requires far greater work or effort than really should be necessary. And many communities have multiple people dedicated to FOIA, a full-time staff that's all they do. And so it is a significant job for each municipality to undertake. And that's why there are often different people in different departments that handle a piece of it. But overall, you have to have one or two, somebody to coordinate it. So that is often something that is addressed in legislation. And so if you ever see that, you might wonder why we would be opposed to it. It's because it's an unfunded mandate. So.
Any other questions?
Oh, I had one more.
Grace?
Also, just a general question too. I was wondering if in our structure there's a pathway for the public in interpreting our local ordinances. Like if someone has a question of how to interpret this ordinance or this zoning, is there a certain part does that fall under the city clerk, or is there a bridge there?
In terms of a question about a specific, it depends on the item. Typically, you would want to send your questions. You could send them either to me or the city administrator, and then she could funnel them to the appropriate person. If it's a zoning question, it'll go to our community development folks. If it's legal question, it'll go to legal, et cetera. But we try to funnel those through. Carol.
And that is the best practice also. So you will get questions. Well, what does this ordinance mean? Or and this may be in advance of a meeting or after passage of something. And the best thing to do is, as suggested by the mayor, to direct those to the administrator so the administrator can get the right answer and can get back to you with the information. It's generally not recommended that you would reach out to staff to try to gather information because there may be more in a different department than you would think. And so if the mayor has indicated the administrator is the point of contact for that, that usually is best.
Yeah, because we don't want, we just can't swamp staff with questions from 7, 8, 9 different people. So it's always good to funnel, we have to funnel it through Carol. And then we'll get it to you. And it's always better to have, if you have questions ahead of time, ask them ahead of time. You know, we love questions.
Ms. Colasetti, did you have a question? Oh, I thought you had your hand up. Okay, so that's the quick overview. So next, like I said, this one's a
could
real
we
barn
take-
burner.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
It looks like there's a 5-minute break on the schedule. Could we go ahead and take that?
If you want to take that now, we were going to take it after this next one, but we could certainly take it now. So we'll take it now.
Could we take it now? Thanks.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So when we come back in a few minutes, we'll start with the Open Meetings Act. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll get started again. And welcome to Patrick Hayes.
That the IML provides. It provides you with practical answers to your questions for your use in your new roles. So please feel welcome to look at that after our session today. We'll start with some background on the Open Meetings Act and identify the public access counselor and their role in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. And then we'll speak a little bit about what brings you at least to this part of the session today, the training requirements for the Open Meetings Act and what those are and how you comply. In the first section of the Open Meetings Act, the legislature has set forth the policy that supports the act. I just want to emphasize a few points, and it's important to keep these in mind, that public bodies exist to aid in the conduct of the public's business. And the people have a right to be informed as to the conduct of their business, and also that the actions and deliberations of public bodies are to be taken openly. Finally, the public shall have advance notice and the right to attend all public meetings. A good understanding of this public policy will help you understand why the act demands so much of local officials. There's a lot of ambition here and a lot to do. So first we're going to talk about who the public access counselor is. The Illinois Attorney General's public access counselor is a statutorily created position within the Illinois Attorney General's office. They are charged with ensuring and enforcing compliance with the Open Meetings Act through advice, training, education, mediation, and issuing binding opinions. They have an updated index of public access counselor opinions available on the Illinois Attorney General website, and that's where the issues are dealt with and published. And this is a pretty dynamic process. You'll see this change over time. And I heard Mayor Marlin talking about the changes to your public input rules, which we'll talk about a little bit. So all of these enforcement issues, when they get published, they have people considering how they might change their process, and your changes in your process reflect that interactive activity between the public access counselor and public bodies. I want to speak just a little bit about the training requirements that bring you here today. Because the Open Meetings Act requires that training, and every elected municipal official and many appointed officials in the state of Illinois have to comply with this training. You must comply with that within 90 days of taking office, so you'll be well within that limit taking care of this today. And that applies to the appointed individuals that municipalities appoint to be Open Meeting Act officers. And those individuals have to take that initial training just like you, but then they have to comply with annual training as well, as long as they're designated the Open Meeting Act officer. Once you've done this training, you don't have to repeat it, and you do not have an annual training requirement as an elected official. IML will issue your certificate after today's, I'm sorry, I'm off a click here. There we go. IML will issue you a certificate after today's session by email. You'll need to file that with your clerk, and you may want to keep a copy of that for your records as well. The municipalities are required to designate those employees, and they have to keep those certificates as well. There are a number of definitions in the Act, and the first one we'll dig into is public body. All of the legislative, executive, administrative, or advisory bodies of cities, villages, and towns are public bodies and subject to the Act. This includes subsidiary bodies, such as your committees and subcommittees. We'll look at a few of those examples. I know that here in Urbana, there's a Committee of the Whole. That is a public body subject to the Act. Your Zoning Board of Appeals is a public body subject to the Act. If your municipality is appointing members to a board or committee pursuant to a local ordinance, that is very likely a subsidiary body and subject to the Open Meetings Act. So that covers a lot of different entities. I heard earlier your IT individual talking about all the different committees and boards that meet, 14 of them or something like that. So they're all public bodies and subject to the Act. The Open Meetings Act applies to meetings, and there's a complex definition of what a meeting is. And we'll take that in different parts. A meeting is any gathering of a majority of the quorum discussing public business. Those meetings may be in person or electronic. People may gather remotely through telephones, audio or video conferencing, the internet, or any other means of contemporaneous interactive communication. A portion of the definition of meeting is a gathering, and gatherings are what we're doing right here today. A meeting of the public body is a gathering. The committee meetings that we just described earlier, the Committee of the Whole, those are gatherings under the Act. Educational and informational meetings are gatherings, and social events may become a gathering under the Open Meetings Act if a majority of the quorum of the body is present and starts discussing public business in a deliberative way. We don't recommend those types of accidental meetings because it creates some complexities with regard to compliance with the Act. So if you're in a social meeting, you can be there and enjoy the company of your colleagues, but avoid discussing public business if you can. A hypothetical may be helpful here. There was unseasonal heavy rain and thunderstorms that deluged Happy Town. The Happy Town president sent text message to all 8 board members containing a warning about heavy rains, high water, flooding, and other problems throughout the town, and attached pictures. The board does not provide cell phones for its members, so the president used her personal cell phone and sent individual text messages to each member's personal cell phone. 5 of the board members responded to her individually by text message within the next 15 minutes. Assume that the board president is not a member of any subcommittees of the board. Does this exchange of text messages violate the Open Meetings Act? This is the barn burner part of the presentation that requires some interaction from you. We're going to give you 3 options on the hypothetical. Don't look ahead to the reveal slide. The first answer is yes, because a majority of the quorum of the board gathered through text messages and exchanged information about the weather conditions. No, because the exchange of text messages was not contemporaneous. It did not meet all of the requirements of meeting under the Open Meetings Act. Or no, because the communication were on private cell phones of the board members. Any of you want to guess what the correct answer is? I know Mayor Marilyn's going to help you out with this one.
Go ahead, Grace.
Oh, I didn't see.
I'd guess the second option, because it wasn't that immediate time exchange and talking about the weather, not city business.
Correct. So it wasn't contemporaneous because they were individual text messages. You may wonder throughout your tenure here why you don't get group messages, and that's one way that perhaps the administrator might control the flow of information and avoid a reply to all that might violate the Open Meetings Act. So in this, with individual texts back and forth, you avoid a violation of the Act. That type of communication is fine, but if it's contemporaneous where you've got a group message, that could violate the Act, so be careful with that. Reply to all is not your friend.
How about a sequential text message? That happens.
Thank you for the question. We do have some time for questions at the end, of course,
Okay.
but when your communications go back to where we used to write letters, and you write a letter to somebody, you can get a letter back, that doesn't violate the Open Meetings Act. But with the electronic immediate exchanges, it sort of crowds into being a violation. So if it's one-on-one, back and forth, you're not going to violate the Act. But in particular, when there's a group replying or being copied, you can violate the Open Meetings Act. This is where reply to all is really an issue for the Open Meeting Act compliance. And you might see people replying sequentially, a copy to one alderman and then a different copy to another one, to get some information exchanged in a timely way, but not violate the Open Meetings Act by collaborating in a group.
Gotcha.
We are still working through our definition of meeting. And the next topic that we'll talk about is majority of a quorum. And that gets into quite a discussion. There we go. I keep managing to fat finger my way through multiple slides, so I apologize, but I have tracked back once again. So a majority of the quorum is a term of art in the Open Meetings Act that's important to understand, and we'll take it in parts. First, a quorum. A quorum is a majority of the members of the public body. For Urbana, that means a quorum of your 8-member city council is 5. And that includes the mayor and 4 aldermen, or any 5 aldermen. A quorum is generally required to be present to start the meeting or to take action. So that number 5 is your quorum. From that, you could develop what the majority of the quorum is. That's more than half in whole numbers rather than fractions of that quorum. 3 members of your city council is a majority of the quorum. They have, because of some smaller committees, created a special rule of 5 that recognizes that in a group of 5, the quorum is 3. But under that special rule, they've altered reality, and the majority of a quorum under the Open Meetings Act of a group of 5 or a committee of 5 is 3, because that gets away from the majority of the quorum being 2, and any conversation between 2 officials being a violation of the act. You may wonder about size of committees. We try to recommend, if you can, don't have committees smaller than 5 to take advantage of this rule, so that 2 aldermen or the mayor and an alderman, if they are all both on a committee, can have a conversation and not worry about violating the Open Meetings Act. The real issue here is, what's a majority of a quorum? You need to keep that in mind. That's 3. That can be any 3 aldermen or the mayor and any 2 aldermen. That's a majority of the quorum of your city council, and that's what you have to be sensitive to in avoiding violations of the Open Meetings Act. Back to the definition of meeting to talk about discussing public business. Here's a lengthy definition of public business, and it's pretty broad. If it's got any relation to the city, it's public business. There is room for you to meet with one another and talk, especially just one-on-one. But when there's more than 2 of you present, you start to have to think about not violating the act by not discussing public business. And keep that in mind as you're interacting with your fellow aldermen and with the mayor and other aldermen. Having completed that definition, we're going to talk about attendance by other means. The Open Meetings Act allows for remote electronic attendance by members of the public body for a meeting. Urbana has adopted a rule that allows for electronic attendance of elected members in limited circumstances, and that's in Section 2-31 of the Urbana Municipal Code. A quorum must still be present at the site of the meeting under this rule, but other members may attend electronically if their absence is due to a personal illness or disability, employment purposes or businesses of the city of Urbana, or family or other emergencies. The council may deny a member's electronic attendance by a 2/3 vote if the request does not meet one of the above criteria. So the questions that arise here, you may want to direct to your staff, the administrator, as we mentioned before, or your legal counsel here. But the board has the ability to rule on whether your absence meets the definition. Family vacations and track meets and football games, other club meetings, those are the types of things that may be important to you, but they probably don't allow you to attend a meeting remotely. And I'd rely on your local staff to determine and flesh out that definition. Another means of conducting business remotely is through the use of the recently enacted changes to the Open Meetings Act regarding disaster declarations. Meetings during a disaster or state of emergency may also be held remotely. There must be a disaster declared by the governor or the Illinois Department of Public Health director, and that disaster must impact the municipality. The mayor has a role in determining that the meeting in person is not prudent, and all attendees must be able to hear all of the discussion and testimony. The public and one staff member or an elected official must be present unless the mayor makes a separate determination that is not feasible due to the disaster. All of the votes must be by a roll call, and everything has to be recorded. The Illinois Municipal League has provided in your materials a fact sheet on this to help municipalities understand their roles. I would point out that Urbana's meeting notice, we used a copy of that. Sorry about that. We used a copy of that here in the presentation to show an example of a compliant notice. It provides the notice and the means of attendance. And so it's excellent work by your staff, Mayor, to stay compliant with the law.
Thank you.
The general rules about meeting locations and accommodations are important to keep in mind as well. The general rule requires that all meetings must be held in a place that is convenient and open to the public unless the disaster provisions apply. Those thoughts should drive your decisions about where and when to hold meetings. So let's consider another hypothetical. At a November meeting, the board planned to address the item suspension or dismissal of the Public Works Director and expected a large crowd. A huge number of citizens showed up at the meeting, and the board's usual meeting room was at capacity. Once that capacity was reached, no additional members of the public were allowed the entrance, nor were there any measures taken to accommodate the crowd. The board considered moving to a larger alternative space in the building that was available. However, the board decided to continue the meeting in the original location because they wanted to get past the vote. Did the board violate the Open Meetings Act? Again, three options. No, because switching rooms after the notice had been posted would violate the Open Meetings Act. Or likely yes, because the board did not make its meeting reasonably accessible to the public. 3, no, because some of the public was able to attend the meeting. Any offer of which of those 3 selections might be correct? Mr. Quisenberry,
I'd say number 2.
once again, correct. It's important to keep in mind that access is important for the public. Convenient and open to the public should be your dominant thoughts. You'll avoid more challenges to the locations of your meeting if they accomplish those tasks. There was just a jurisdiction in Metro East that had a court action about a meeting location that they shifted to accommodate a crowd, and they made rules where the public could participate, albeit in a hybrid fashion. And they were able to hold their meeting, and there was no action. The court upheld the city's plan in that meeting. So you can change the location of the meeting as suggested here. You give notice to the public, and that works. So make sure that if there's a large crowd coming, you have some way to let the public participate, whether it's in the room or remotely by hybrid or in a larger facility. All public bodies must adopt an annual meeting schedule and post and distribute that to the media as required in the Open Meetings Act. And each agenda must be posted at least 48 hours in advance of meetings unless there is an emergency meeting, in which case the notice must be posted as soon as practical. The Open Meetings Act provides the notice of meetings and agendas has to be posted for public review continuously for that 48-hour period prior to the meeting at the principal office of the body, or if there isn't a principal office, wherever the meeting's being held. Website posting is required for 48 hours prior to the meeting if your full-time staff maintains the municipal website. And I think that applies here in Urbana. And that website posting satisfies the continuous posting requirement. Many municipalities do both, and they want to make sure the public knows what's going on. You can do the physical posting and comply, or you can, if you have a sufficient staff, you have to do the website posting. There's been litigation and a number of public access counselor opinions about what is sufficient information for an item to be on the agenda. And you may discuss any item at a regular meeting, but you may only discuss items on the agenda at any special meeting. For any final action, the agenda must include the general subject matter and main elements of the item up for consideration. We've put a couple of examples together, and the first one is independent contractor agreement. And that would fail to identify the general nature of what is being discussed and voted on about the agreement or what the independent contractor is doing. I suppose if you added what the contract was about, such as for annual parking lot striping to that entry, it would be sufficient. So you have to give the public notice. The next is an example of an acceptable item, which would be approve the contract for the city manager. That, even though it's brief, that would be sufficient to give the public knowledge of what's going on. It's not required to have a lot of detail about what the agreement is, other than identifying sufficiently the general nature of the agreement. Once again, we used Urbana's, we've got Urbana's recent agenda. I think this was for your April 12th meeting, if I'm not mistaken. And this shows an excellent example of the type of material and the entries that are required to do regular business. Once again, Mayor, your staff is certainly up to snuff and knows what it's doing with agenda posting, so thank you. We've got an additional hypothetical about these topics. The Green Village Board called a special meeting to discuss whether to purchase a parcel of land abutting the village's wildlife conservation area that had just went up for sale. The village clerk called the board members on a Tuesday to let them know the meeting would be held at 4 p.m. the next afternoon on Wednesday. The agenda, which the clerk posted 24 hours before the meeting, consisted of only one item: discussion of the purchase of real property at 1000 Wildlife Road. Has the public received proper notice of the special meeting? Yes, because the property just went up for sale. Yes, because the meeting agenda only included a property purchase item for discussion, so no notice to the public was required. Or 3, no, the meeting notice and agenda should have been posted at least 48 hours in advance in accordance with OMA's requirements. Do I have a participant? Alderman Wu says it's number 3. Thank you. And you're right. I would point out in this example, the posting likely meets the agenda requirement for final action. And if the discussion is only about the property purchase, the council remained within the restrictions that discussions in a special meeting are limited to items on the agenda. However, without additional facts justifying an emergency, the posting does not meet the 48-hour requirement, so it would violate the act. We are often asked, can anyone video record our meetings? And the public meetings may be recorded so long as the meeting is not disrupted. You may note that rules regarding recording meetings may be adopted. They have to be written and reasonable and published to the public. And you can, as long as they're compliant with the act, establish rules for recording of your meetings. But you have to allow it. The Open Meetings Act also provides that record keeping by the board must meet a number of conditions. You have to have written minutes of all your meetings, and those have to include the time, date, and place of the meeting. A summary of the discussion of all matters proposed, deliberated, or decided. The names of all members of the public body that are present and absent, and a record of any votes taken in open session. Another question we often get, do we have to record all the public input? Your meetings can reflect that there's public input given, perhaps who gives them and what the topic is, but a detailed description of what's presented in public input section is not required under the Act. With regard to those minutes, those have to be approved in a timely fashion within 30 days of the public body's second, or within 30 days or at the public body's second subsequent regular meeting, whichever is later. I think your committee of the whole meetings might be held as one of those two meetings, so you need to be careful with that. There was a decision on that a couple of years ago. So you have to make the meetings available to the public within 10 days of approval. The public bodies with full-time staff that maintains a website. You recall that was a requirement earlier regarding posting the notice and agendas. You also must, if you have that staffing, you must also post the minutes on the website. Public bodies should schedule a review of their closed session minutes at least every 6 months in order to maintain compliance with the Act. Public comment is required of all public bodies, so you have to entertain public comment at all your meetings. Any person, resident or not, may address the council. Again, the council may adopt rules regarding that as long as they are written and published, and the rules must be reasonable. You must allow the comment at the meeting, but as Cassie mentioned earlier, you don't have to respond to those comments at the meeting. Once again, I'll mention that we pulled the public comment material from your website. I know it's tough to read at this scale, but I think this is version 6. I don't know if that's the most recent one. The mayor was talking about a recent agenda or a recent change to the public input rules, but this was off your website recently, and it's a good example of the fact that these change over time, and posting them on the website is helpful for the public. Mayor?
There is a more recent version.
Well, we were ahead of time putting this material together, and but by way of example, that shows how this process changes over time and how your staff will be approaching you with changes on these very important rules as input from the public and or your input creates that need to change those. We've got an additional hypothetical. A village board established and recorded rules for public comment in an ordinance entitled Limitation of Debate. A portion of the board rules provides an individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. During the public comment at the September board meeting, Bob Smith, a local accountant, mentioned the subject of the village's property taxes, having just paid his second installment on his residence. The board interrupted him and said because he had already commented on property taxes 3 other times that year, including speaking on the levy ordinance, the annual budget, and the compensation ordinance, that he could not address the board about property taxes again until the next calendar year. Did the board act properly? Yes, because the limitation period is part of the board's established and recorded rules concerning public comment. No, the rule was not narrowly tailored to advance a significant governmental interest and impermissibly restricts the public's right to address the board. Or 3, yes, because he can address the board about property tax issues again next year. Do I have him volunteer? I'll answer this one. The correct answer is no. The rule is not narrowly tailored to advance a significant governmental interest. Limiting comment based on content is going to be very difficult to support. If someone wants to repetitively address something during public comment, you basically need to entertain those. We're going to provide a little information about closed sessions. Public bodies may meet in closed session under the exceptions to the Open Meetings Act. I'll just mention a few of the more common exemptions under 2C of the Act. appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees is often used because it's a number of different topics about employees, and one thing municipalities do is they talk about their employees a lot. Litigation, although there are additional findings required for probable or imminent litigation. If you're fearful of a matter being filed, you need to cautiously listen to your legal counsel and perhaps your administrator guiding you whether it's an appropriate time to meet. And then there's other requirements of making a record of the reason for that once you're in closed session, so that on a review they can understand why it's imminent or probable. This is another subject of a lot of public access counselor opinions. You can meet in closed session to review closed session minutes. As I mentioned earlier, you need to do that at least every 6 months. And self-evaluation practices and procedures when meeting with a representative of a statewide association of which the public body is a member. That's, for you, that's the Illinois Municipal League. And we do offer self-evaluation services. You've got a flyer for it in your materials today. And our executive director does meet with municipalities with some regularity, and they go through self-evaluation and improvement processes. And that's been quite helpful for a number of our member entities. I want to note an area of caution here about closed session, that the exceptions for closed session are narrowly construed by the public access counselors and the courts. It's better to defer a discussion than to meet in closed session in violation of the Open Meetings Act. You can defer to your staff for help on making those decisions. There's a process for convening in closed session, and it's important to comply with that process. The motion must be made in an open session of a properly noticed open meeting. The specific exemption supporting the closed session has to be cited in the motion. Your staff might script a motion for you to make sure you have the right language. There must be a roll call vote with a majority of the quorum voting in favor of the closed session meeting. The motion may be to convene a closed session immediately, or you might designate a future time and date for that closed session. This is often used when there's a settlement conference on a lawsuit or some reason to have the meeting at another time, perhaps to interview someone if you want to place somebody on a board, that type of thing. So if the exception of the Open Meetings Act applies and the timing of it doesn't quite work, you can do it at another time in the future. There's some rules about doing it within 3 months and things like that, but you can set that up for another time and date. There has to be a verbatim or word-for-word recording, so an audio recording of all closed sessions is required. Minutes of the closed session must be prepared, and we want to emphasize that no final action may be taken in closed session. And here's a hypothetical about closed sessions. Recall that one of the exceptions is the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees. So a public body may hold a closed session meeting to consider those. In this hypothetical, the Director of Human Resources filed a request for review with the Public Access Counselor, alleging that the Board of Trustees had violated the Open Meetings Act by discussing the termination of his employment in open session rather than in a closed session. What should the Public Access Counselor decide? One, the PAC should decide that the board violated the Open Meetings Act because the board must discuss termination and employment of the employment contract in closed session under the 2C1 exception. Two, that the Public Access Counselor should conclude that the request for review does not assert facts alleging a violation of OMA. And three, the PAC should review the open session discussion to determine whether the board violated the director's employment contract. Any volunteers on this one? I'll take it. Number 2, the PAC should conclude that the request for review does not assert facts alleging a violation of OMA. Keep in mind that the Act says you may convene in closed session. The bias of the Act is to have everything occur in the open. So there's no requirement to meet in closed session, even if there's an exception to the Open Meetings Act that applies. A couple things about closed sessions that we wanted to mention. The municipality is not liable for disclosure of matters that are subject to exceptions for closed sessions. And there's no statutory provision for sanctions against an elected official for disclosing matters discussed in closed session, although that can be quite destructive to the interests of the municipality. And we don't encourage that, but there is no statutory rule against it. Please remember that all of the discussions in closed sessions are recorded, and they're likely to be public someday. So maintaining the decorum of a regular public open meeting is important even when you're convening in closed session. We want to now provide a little bit of information about what's required to take final action. We mentioned that final action may not be taken in a closed session. The Open Meetings Act requires that matters that are considered for final action be on the agenda and recited sufficiently to inform the public of the matter. In a case that was ultimately decided by the Illinois Supreme Court, the Springfield School District had approved the separation agreement of the school superintendent. The agenda item included approval of resolution regarding the separation agreement and release between Superintendent D. Walter Mitten, Jr. and the Board of Education. During the open session meeting, the board president recited the general nature of the matter under consideration, a separation agreement and release, and specific details sufficient to identify the particular transaction. The separation agreement was between Dr. Milton and the board. A complaint filed on behalf of a local newspaper alleged the approval violated the Open Meetings Act, and that resulted in the public access counselor issuing a binding opinion that held the district violated the Act's requirements by failing to provide sufficient information to the public prior to taking final action. There have been some discussions, considerable discussions, of this issue in closed session prior to that open meeting. The district sought administrative review of that binding opinion, and the dispute was ultimately decided through extensive litigation. The Illinois Supreme Court determined that the agenda and the public recitation by the district was sufficient. You may use your closed session to develop a consensus of what action your council might take, but the final action has to be taken in an open meeting with sufficient information on the agenda and sufficient recitation at the meeting in order to support that vote. Any person may file a request for review within 60 days of an alleged violation of the Open Meetings Act. The public access counselor might do any number of things, may contact the municipality if action is warranted, seeking a response, or might resolve the matter without even contacting the municipality. I think they've had nearly 70,000 requests of the public access counselor since they started. And so sometimes you don't even hear from them. But if you do, you've got obligations to reply in a timely manner, and there's a number of rules that apply, and your staff is familiar with that process. The public access counselor might resolve that issue through mediation or direct advice to the municipality or issuing an advisory or a binding opinion. If the PAC finds the Open Meetings Act was violated, it could order any number of outcomes. It might direct the public body to release the closed session minutes and the recording. May require the public body to take final action on the disputed matter in a future meeting. Might require that the public body establish processes to avoid violations in the future. And in addition, the Open Meetings Act may be enforced through civil actions in circuit court. Misdemeanor prosecutions for violations of the Open Meetings Act is possible, but those are very rare. Wrapping up, we'd like to make sure that you have signed the attendance sheet that was circulated today, so that you receive the certificate of completion of your training. This will be emailed to you. You should submit a copy of that certificate to your clerk and keep a copy of that for your own records. Remember to follow the procedures of and the requirements of the Open Meetings Act in your official capacity and interaction with other elected officials. And if you are uncertain, you should request assistance from your staff, your municipal attorney, the public access counselor, or the Illinois Municipal League. I want to thank you all for coming today. I know I didn't meet the barn burner expectations set by my boss, but I do hope that the information presented, both in the materials in the slide deck, but also the sunshine laws, is helpful to you in your activities. And I'd like to invite any questions you may have, and we can address any of those if we're able to provide you an answer today. So if you have any questions.
James?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I want to go back to hypothetical number 5,
Okay.
which is the one about the contract that the person being discussed in public about their dismissal.
Correct.
I'm curious, the third item was about the person's contract. Do people end up with contracts that stipulate that discussion about their discipline and so forth be held in a closed meeting?
So a couple questions come out of that.
Okay.
You can discuss that issue in closed session because it's regarding the specific issues that are within that exception. A specific employee's employment, terms of the employment, things like that, you can discuss in closed session. Now, the public access counselor doesn't have any ability to look at a contract between an employee and the organization and determine whether that contract was violated. So that part of the answer was kind of a red herring.
I'm just curious if
Sure.
that happens, if people
Oh.
ask for that in their contract and municipalities agree to it.
We don't, I'm not aware of a contract that's elaborate for an appointed municipal official. It's not a typical practice. I can't say it doesn't happen, but I'm not aware of such a contract that would get into that depth, particularly for like a public works director. Those are usually appointments, and any kind of agreements or employment letter are generally kept pretty simple.
All right, thanks for indulging my curiosity.
No, this is the best part of the job, so thank you for coming and thank you for asking a question. Thanks.
Chris?
This might be for you, Diane and Carol. When we have overflow of the public at one of our meetings, I'm thinking post-pandemic, do we have a designated alternative site for a meeting?
Not officially, but now we have the ability to, we also have room capacity per fire code that we have to adhere to, but
Right.
we now have the video monitor out in the hall that has the same thing that we see on the monitor, so people can follow the meeting out in the lobby. If we exceed the capacity of the lobby, then I'm not sure where we would go.
Okay.
But at this point, we do have the lobby as an
Okay.
overflow area, so that's helped a lot, actually.
Second question is, are we archiving video of council meetings on the website?
Yes.
Like, how long back? I mean, is it like a year, 2 years? Do you know?
Longer than that. I
Okay.
don't know the exact time, but I can find that out for you.
Great.
Jaya?
Yeah, I have a couple questions that are more for you as well, Mayor Marlin. The first, you mentioned there's a Open Meetings Act officer, I think was the term that was used. Who would that be for us in Urbana?
At this point, I'm not sure. Have we appointed? Phyllis. Phyllis is our
Phyllis?
Open Meetings Act officer. Yeah.
And then the questions about the updated procedures not being on the website, do we have a timeline of when those will be posted? Because I know there have been a lot of questions from residents.
The changes have been through ordinances that have been passed over the past 6 months, and our city code gets updated periodically, but it doesn't happen immediately after every ordinance is passed. But every ordinance is listed on the website, so that's available for people to see. And then the updated rules, for example, for public meetings, are reflected in the agenda immediately after
Right.
the ordinance is passed. So if people want to know the absolute latest version, it would be what's printed on the agenda for a given meeting.
Thank you.
The code, I discovered, one of the things I've discovered, our city code is it's a living document, but it doesn't always, it takes a while to get it updated in Municode. Mary Alice?
Thank you for the presentation. Sorry, I'll turn on my mic there. I had a question about meeting notification and the agenda items. So the special meeting is the same as a regular meeting, 48 hours in advance, but a special meeting can only take action on the items on the agenda. So can you also rearrange? Are you allowed to rearrange the agenda as long as everything that was listed on the agenda is still covered?
So, a couple things. Special meetings, you can take action on items on the agenda, but you can only discuss those items.
Right, sorry.
Whereas in a
Yes.
regular meeting, you can discuss any topic that comes up. You can only take final action on things that are in the agenda. Okay? So, the agenda defines what action can be taken at the meeting. And I'm sorry, I lost track of what perhaps the other part of your question was.
Yeah, my second part of the question was, if we're not, it sounds to me like you're not able to amend the agenda for a special meeting, but sometimes we will rearrange things. They still are listed on the agenda, but maybe we want to swap C for A and so
Sure.
forth. Is that allowed in a special meeting?
The local rules would guide your order of business for a meeting. In a special meeting, likely, I don't believe there's any sort of order of business for your special meetings. It might mock what goes on in your regular meetings. The chair of the meeting at most any meeting has the ability to adjust the order of items on the agenda. And most entities are going to accommodate that kind of activity by the chair. There are technical abilities of members of a body to call the chair's attention that they're out of order on the agenda and call for a point of order and get back to the order on the agenda. But for the most part, if the chair of the meeting wants to adjust the agenda for whatever reason, that's almost always accommodated unless there's a real good reason to object. There are procedural parliamentary ways to deal with those issues. The body makes the decision. So this body has declared for its regular meetings there's an order of business, but generally would allow the chair to modify that for a specific meeting for good reason.
So does that modification of the order of the meeting have to be taken up for a vote?
I think that most entities do that without that level of formality, but in point of fact, if it's done without a vote, somebody can say, point of order. I'd like to get the sense where the body wants to go. This is a rapport issue that builds up over time, and specific local rules can be adopted because municipalities can adopt rules for their proceedings. They don't have to follow any format. Many places adopt Robert's rules. That's what our parliamentary guide is based off of. But you can adopt specific rules, and there are a few areas where state law dictates some procedural issues, but that's very limited.
And then if you have not been able to get through the agenda, we have a cutoff time of 11 or 11:30?
10:30 with extension to 11.
Extension to 11, sorry. If we can't get through all of the business on the agenda, you're allowed to reconvene before 24 hours with the same agenda, and you have to post the agenda again if you reconvene after 48 hours. Is that correct?
So I think the way to think about that is you can reconvene a meeting if you make note in the meeting that you're going to reconvene and you specify the time, date, and place. You can do that without having to worry about the 48-hour rule of the Open Meetings Act. If your reconvened meeting is more than 48 hours out, you could post a different agenda and do it that way.
So we don't have to post an agenda if we're just reconvening a meeting, even if it's over 24 hours.
I think you'd still post the agenda,
But do we have to meet the 48-hour?
but the 48-hour rule doesn't apply.
It doesn't
The agenda
apply.
posting requirement still applies,
Right, right.
but you're forgiven the 48-hour on reconvening.
Okay.
And thank you for that question, because it's not in our materials, but it will be. So thank you very much. That's excellent.
I think Sharice has a question as well. She has her hand raised.
Sharice is
Hi.
attending virtually.
I'm on Zoom.
Well, welcome.
Can I talk? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I have a question, number one, about the certification and me getting a certificate because I'm doing this via Zoom. Will I be able to do that?
The Illinois Municipal League is statutorily authorized to give this training. In that act, it talks about electronic training by the public access counselor, but there's no reference to electronic training by the Illinois Municipal League. Because we want to be cautious and make sure we comply with all aspects of the act, we don't intend to provide electronic opportunities to get a certificate. You can obtain that certificate by online through the public access counselor, but it's our view that that's the only means for electronic compliance under the act as the act is expressed right now. So I'm sorry, we won't be able to issue a certificate to you.
Okay, so my other question is, having already done this before, am I required to do it? Am I required to be recertified or whatever?
No, the act specifically provides that for elected officials, once you comply with the initial training for any purpose, you're compliant and you don't have to recomply.
Okay, so I don't need a certificate anyway.
If you
Okay.
if you have your certificate from that prior training, you may want to provide it to your clerk.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is regarding the closed meetings issue. If is it allowable for example, if we have appointments coming up and so on and so forth, that where we are getting information, could we get information in a closed meeting regarding appointments and such, before in a closed meeting before we vote on them in a open meeting session?
There are specific exceptions for employees. Appointees to elected offices are also subject to a closed session. I don't know that committee appointees or other appointees are. I think that you can get information from your staff about appointees in advance without it being in a meeting setting. But as far as a deliberative discussion about appointments, you need to make sure that the specific role is covered by a specific exemption for the act, and your staff can assist you with those specific issues.
Well, what I mean is, like, for example, if there's going to be an appointment or a what's the word? Senior moment here. A promotion of sorts from, let's say, in the fire department, you have someone that's being appointed or promoted to the lieutenant from a sergeant. And would it be possible for a closed session to take place regarding that? Because that does kind of involve employee.
Right.
That's what.
Yes, if the discussion's about a specific employee, it'd be my view, unless your staff has some other information, that would comply under this 2C1 exception for the employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee. That would apply to dealing with the promotional issues regarding a specific employee.
So it would be proper to have a closed session meeting regarding that type of appointment or promotion?
From what you've described with regard to a specific employee and promotion, yes, that would be subject to that exception, and you could have that conversation in closed session if a majority of the body approved that closed session for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
We have time for one more question. Grace?
As far as Open Meeting Act stuff with communicating with the public, are there no regulations with that? It's just subject to FOIA, meaning that you could discuss city public or city business with the public, and there's not a limit on the number of people as long as it's like one official and the public. Is that correct?
Right. There's no restriction under the Open Meetings Act of an individual elected official having conversations with any number of members of the public, as long as they're not fellow elected officials of the same public body.
I have one more quick one, if I could. How about communication one-on-one with multiple officials, or is that get a blurry line? Like if I talked to Chandra about something and then talked to the mayor separately about the same thing, does that fall in there?
As long as you don't share a committee of less than 5, you can speak to any other elected official of your public body. I don't think you have any small committees. So because I think your only committee is a committee of the whole, unless I'm missing something. So there's no issue with you meeting with another individual alderman or the mayor with regard to the Open Meetings Act.
Okay.
You're not a majority of a quorum of any public body. So you can meet and talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. In our next presentation, our Assistant Counsel, Allie Ahern, will speak about ethics and conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Patrick. Yes, my name is Allie Ahern, and I will be speaking on ethics and conflicts of interest laws and other issues that pertain to you as elected officials here in Urbana. Okay, so to start off with, why is it so important for you to know this information? Well, because municipal officials have an obligation to conduct themselves and all public business openly and ethically. As members of the public body who create the standards that govern your community, you are held to a high standard of ethical and law-abiding behavior yourselves. In order to be certain that you are meeting those high standards, it is necessary for you to learn about the statutory and common law constraints that exist and how they apply to you as you hold elected office. To provide a roadmap for this session, you will see on the screen in front of you on the topics I'll be touching on, and we'll also have some time following my remarks for questions as we have been doing. So what gives rise to a conflict of interest? This is when a private interest of an official directly or indirectly conflicts with the public interest that the official yourselves have a duty to uphold. Statutory requirements are, as suggested by the name and the word statutory, derived from statute. And there are a number of acts and provisions in Illinois state law that govern in this area. But in addition to those in statute, there are also what are referred to as common law conflicts of interest. And this is a body of law that comes from court cases and litigation. It applies to conflicts that are maybe not expressly laid out in, as we'll see, in statute, but will be deemed a conflict of interest based on the facts of the situation. As a complement to the material I will be presenting, included in your stack of publications is our Conflicts of Interest book. And this is a great resource to become familiar with and to reference throughout your time on City Council. In addition to providing general foundational concepts and information, you might be able to find an answer to a specific question in this book. And lastly, if you are wondering or do have a specific conflict that you're wondering about for yourself personally, a good person to talk to is your city attorney and or city administrator might be able to help you. In addition to the possibility that an elected official may have a conflict of interest arising from their position, it is also possible that you may have a conflict of duties which could arise from holding two positions at one time. This is also labeled as an incompatibility of office. And an incompatibility of office arises when a state statute specifically prohibits the occupant of one office from holding another office, or where the duties of either office are such that the holder of one office cannot in every instance properly and fully, faithfully discharge all the duties of the other office. And we'll go over some examples in the next slide. So basically, a conflict of interest is a conflict of an individual's private interest and the public's interest. A conflict of duties is about the functions of multiple offices. For example, as an alderman, you may have, your role as an alderman means you may want certain outcomes for your constituents. That may be at odds with what your role could be as a county official who may want certain outcomes for a county as a whole. If you find yourself in doubt over a conflict of interest scenario or possibly an incompatibility of office question, again, seek advice from a city attorney or retain counsel on the specific facts of the situation. Under the Public Officer Prohibited Activity Act, both conflicts of interest and conflicts of duties are prohibited by different clauses. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, we're past that. Okay, sorry about that, thanks. Under the Public Officer Prohibited Activity Act, both conflicts of interest and conflicts of duties are prohibited by different clauses. This act governs if an elected official can hold any other office without a conflict of duties and what financial interests of an elected official are prohibited or allowed when it comes to municipal contracts. The act states that no alderman of any city during the term of office for which he or she is elected may accept, be appointed to, or hold any office by the appointment of the mayor unless the alderman is granted a leave of absence from such office, or unless he or she first resigns from the office of alderman, or unless the holding of another office is authorized by law. The Illinois Attorney General has issued opinions on a number of incompatible offices, and two examples that involve aldermen are the offices of alderman and county board member are incompatible, as well as alderman and county zoning administrator are incompatible, just as examples. If you find yourself considering running for a position on a different board or for a county position, you need to be aware that there are some restrictions or certain measures that need to be taken in order to avoid a conflict of duties or holding incompatible offices. This may include taking a leave of absence from your position or even a resignation. This act also prohibits the direct or indirect financial interest in contracts. And this includes in your own name, in the name of another person, association, trust, or corporation. And then this also may seem obvious, but it is prohibited activity under this act to promise to vote in any one way because of a gift or money that someone gives you. As we know, that is called a bribe, and it is illegal. Later, I will go into a little more detail about the ban on gifts and the exceptions to that restriction. The Public Officer Prohibited Activities Act is really written to prohibit public officials from having financial interests and interests in contracts that would influence and potentially corrupt their duties as public officials. In essence, it restricts municipal officials from having financial interests in any contract, work, or business of the municipality. Keeping your work as an elected official totally separate from financial opportunities is the safest way to conduct yourselves as an alderman. However, there are a few limited exceptions for when a member of city council with a financial interest in a business deal may contract with the city. The first exception is a contract may be entered into even if a member of the board holds an interest in a contracting business if the following conditions are met. This first example will describe an instance where a board member may have some ownership interest in a business that is seeking a contract with the municipality. The first element that needs to be met is that the member's share in ownership is less than 7.5%. And then you need to look at the amount of the contract. If the contract exceeds $1,500, the contract must be awarded after sealed bids to the lowest responsible bidder. But if the contract is less than $1,500, it may be awarded without bidding. And then you also need to look to see if the amount of the contract would create a situation where one entity is awarded more than $25,000 within one fiscal year. As so long as it does not, there may be an exception. And then additionally, the interested member at this time must publicly disclose their interest and abstain from deliberating in any manner or voting on the award of the contract. We sort of touched on this earlier, the abstention from voting. This is an area where it is required that you publicly disclose your interest and abstain from both deliberating and voting on the matter. The contract then must be approved by a majority vote of those holding office, not including that interested member. The second exception applies to a contract for lower amounts of money. The interested member of the governing body, for our purposes seated here today, an alderman, can contract if the following conditions are met. It's that the contract amount does not exceed $2,000 for one single contract or an aggregate amount of $4,000 to one entity within one fiscal year. Additionally, the interested member, again, must publicly disclose the interest and abstain from deliberating and voting on the contract. Lastly, same as prior, the contract must be approved by a majority vote of those holding office, not including the person who has abstained. And lastly, a third exception that I'll go into in detail, an interested member can contract to provide materials, merchandise, property, services, or labor if the interested member of the governing body has a less than 1% share in the ownership and the company's stock is traded on a nationally recognized securities market. Again, the interested member would publicly disclose their interest, abstain from deliberating and voting on the award of the contract, and the vote would have to be approved by a majority of the members holding office. Additionally, under this act, a council member is not deemed interested if he or she owns or holds an interest of 1% or less through a mutual fund in a company doing business with the municipality, and that company's stock is traded on a nationally recognized securities market. Example of this type of situation may be an alderman owns, for example, some stock in GM. It would not prohibit the municipality from then contracting to buy Chevy pickup trucks for the municipal fleet. And also, exceptions may apply for public utility contracts and for doing business with a local bank if a member of the city council is affiliated with either entity. If any of these exceptions may apply to you, it would just be in your best interest to examine the details of your interests and your financial interests and possibly discuss those with your city attorney or your own personal attorney if you have any questions or concerns. It is worth noting that there may be serious criminal consequences to a violation of this act. So that's why it's so important to make sure you consult with proper legal advice. An improper conflict of interest in a contract or the holding of incompatible offices is a Class 4 felony. And that is in addition to the loss of your position as an elected official. A helpful way to navigate these situations is to maybe take a step back and ask yourself before entering into a contract or voting on it, if you think you have some interest, is think, okay, if this came out and was a front page newspaper story, would I be comfortable with that? If you feel that you would not want that to be the case, that's a time that you just need to not vote or take the proper measures that we've discussed. Again, you can protect yourself if you have your doubts or confusion about interests conflicting with that of the city by, as we mentioned, discussing with the city attorney or city administrator. Common law conflicts of interest are, again, not a violation of statute, but they may arise in situations where the activity of the doesn't violate the Public Officer Prohibited Activities Act, but is nonetheless a conflict of interest when the facts of the situation are examined. A conflict could arise when official action could result in a personal advantage or disadvantage to a member of the governmental body. And a member of the governmental body with a personal interest coming before the City Council is disqualified under common law from voting or otherwise acting on the matter. Your duty as an alderman, it's best to think of, is to act in the best interest of the residents and not of yourself. As an example, you can consider a situation where an alderman is also maybe a real estate agent by profession, but is asked in his or her capacity as an alderman to consider the annexation of property to form a new subdivision. The alderman realtor may see an opportunity to act as a broker for the developer on the project. Because the direct interest of the alderman is not in the annexation agreement, because they're not the developer of the project, but they nonetheless could potentially have a financial relationship with helping broker the deal. There may be potential for financial gain to the alderman. And that is where that could clearly interfere with that person's ability to objectively weigh the merits of the proposal. In such an example, the interested member should recuse him or herself from discussion, disclose the interest, and abstain from voting. Often, as a member of City Council, you will be required to approve contracts. When it comes to these public contracts, all prospective bidders and the general public must have access to the same information and same specifications about the proposed public contracts. Careful attention must be given to the provisions that govern the contracting process for bidding or awarding contracts for goods, services, or construction projects. The examples listed on the slide are all prohibited by the Illinois Criminal Code, and essentially many of them just boil down to any attempt or actual giving of someone an unfair advantage in the bidding process. The first item listed here, bid rigging. This is when a local official with the intent to influence a contract award provides information to a bidder concerning the price or other material terms of the bid that would otherwise not be disclosed to a competitor. Others include facilitating kickbacks or bribes, again, prohibited activity. And last on the list here is improperly allowing change orders for large amounts of money, either an increase or decrease in $10,000 is the trigger amount, or that change the deadline of a project by 30 days or more in either direction, either extending a project 30 days or finishing it 30 days before scheduled. If substantial changes to a project are warranted, there is a proper procedure to follow, and that is what you should follow in order to properly approve them. Those changes the following conditions should be met: that the circumstances that necessitated the change were unforeseeable at the time the contract was signed, the change is germane to the original contract, and the change is in the best interest of the local government. As an alderman, take care and notice if someone is approaching you asking about city business outside of an open meeting setting. One way to make sure you don't unintentionally disclose any information that you shouldn't is to refer inquisitive parties to direct their questions back to staff. This way you don't ever provide information to one person that hasn't been provided to the public at large. There are also criminal penalties, including Class 3 or 4 felonies, depending on the infraction of this act. And it is the Illinois Criminal Code that places various restrictions on bidders and contractors, public officials and employees of the state, and units of local government involving the award and solicitation of public contracts. As I touched upon a few times, I think other people have, you have a wonderful support staff. We've already met some of them today, just the morning we've been here. And those are the people who can answer questions to the public about the bid process and handling. And again, that can shield you from having to give one person any information that might not be available to everyone. You know, to your role as an alderman is budgetary and for policy approval, and it shouldn't be focused on answering questions about bids or, you know, paperwork submitting, things of that nature. Another statute that governs ethics is the State Officials and Employee Ethics Act, and we know that this involves ethics because it's right there in the title. The main purpose of this act is to regulate prohibited political activities by public officials and the giving and receiving of gifts by those who do business with them. Employees are prohibited from intentionally performing prohibited political activity during any compensated time, and that includes lunchtime. But compensated time does not include vacation, personal, or paid time off. Essentially, the meaning of this act is to keep your political activity separate from your role as an alderman. Do not engage in prohibited political activity on compensated time. Do not use city resources for the benefit of any campaign for elective office. And do not solicit or require any government officials or employees to participate in prohibited activity as part of their job. Under the Act, there are 15 defined prohibited activities and 6 defined prohibited sources. Part of the state statute requires local governments to adopt an ordinance to these effects, and the local ordinance can be no less strict than the state law. Here in Urbana, we've touched on that the online code may be lagging a little bit, but I found that you have the City Officials and Employee Ethics and Political Activity Ordinance, which governs these topics. You know, examples of prohibited activities are preparing for, organizing, or participating in political meetings, political rallies, political demonstrations, soliciting contributions, or managing or working on a campaign for elective office in city property. A prohibited source means any person or entity who is seeking official action by a member of the city council, or does business or seeks to do business with the member or officer, or conducts activities regulated by the member or officer of city council, has interests that may be substantially affected by the performance or non-performance of the official duties, or is registered or required to be registered with the Secretary of State under the Lobbyist Registration Act. And lastly, a prohibited source is also an agent, a spouse, or an immediate family member who is living with a prohibited source. Violations of this can result in a Class A misdemeanor, a fine from $1,000 to $5,000, and employee discipline or discharge. The State Officials and Employees Ethics Act includes a gift ban, which I briefly touched on earlier. This applies to elected officials in that they are banned from intentionally soliciting or accepting gifts from a prohibited source. The Urbana ordinance provides that no elected official and no spouse of or immediate family member living with the elected official shall intentionally solicit or accept any gift from any prohibited source described herein, or which is otherwise prohibited by law or ordinance. And no prohibited source shall intentionally offer or make a gift that violates this section. Okay, so what does that mean? Can you never accept anything from anyone in this town again? No, that is not the intent, and there are a number of exceptions listed here, and we'll go into some of those as well. You know, for one example, it may be that a local business who is interested in contracting with the city invites you to a lunch, and this may be proper if the meal is less than $75. One of the exceptions is food or refreshments not exceeding $75 on any single day per person. Additionally, gifts from friends and family are also okay if they are not made to influence you in your official capacity. Also, gifts from one source of up to $100 in one calendar year are permitted, just so long as you do not go over that threshold. By way of example, just do one, and I won't put anyone on the spot, I'll give you the answers right after. Say a computer vendor to the city is also your best friend from high school. This person offers you 4 tickets to a baseball game for you and your family, and this cost is well over $100. Can you go? Well, you know it's over $100, which is the limit for one calendar year, but she offered this for no reason that has to do with her capacity as the computer vendor, and is just based solely on your friendship of years past. This is okay. Another example, can you sit in the mayor's office and use her phone to make campaign calls? No. No, you cannot use municipal property for political purposes. If you find yourself to inadvertently have accepted a gift, there are ways to avoid liability in this situation. There is a way to cure a violation of the gift ban. Whatever the situation was, maybe you were caught off guard and someone wanted to give you something and you thought it would be rude or uncomfortable to refuse them to their face. You can accept it knowing that you can later contact this person and explain the prohibition on accepting it, and you can arrange to return that item or donate either that item or the dollar amount equal to that item to a charity. Lastly, report this if something like this does happen and you have given a gift back or cured the situation in some way, this would be a time to report the entire transaction to your staff, their ethics advisor or the city administrator, so that there is a record of what happened, and doing this will promptly remove any problem with trying to recall what happened, whether it's a few months or a year down the road. So note the people involved, the gift or the amount, what was returned or donated, and to what entity and what dates this happened, and that will provide a clear paper trail of what happened. The Illinois Governmental Ethics Act requires specified public officials to file a statement of economic interest, and this requirement applies to people who are elected to office in a unit of local government and also the candidates for nomination or election to that office, which for those of you sitting in this room, you had to file as a candidate, and you'll have to file on an annual basis as a sitting member of City Council. So this is just what the form looks like on the Secretary of State's website. And this is how it looks today. It's worth noting that the General Assembly is currently considering a number of ethics reform bills, and some of these include a change to this form, expanding possibly some of the requirements. And as you will hear shortly from my colleague, the IML Legislative Department is tracking these bills and will provide updates on measures that pass that may ultimately impact municipal officials at the end of the session. Public officers commit official misconduct under the Illinois Criminal Code when, in their official capacities, they commit any of the following acts. It's intentionally or recklessly failing to perform any mandatory duty as required by law, knowingly performing an act which they know they are forbidden by law to perform, or with intent to obtain a personal advantage for themselves or another, they perform an act in excess of their lawful authority, or soliciting or knowingly accepting a fee or reward for the performance of any act which they know is not authorized by law. This statute just should not be taken lightly because even minor infractions can lead to a felony conviction. I'll touch on one Illinois Supreme Court misconduct case that was decided in 2008. In this case, a mayor had used a municipal credit card for personal expenses, but paid the credit card bill back as it came in with his own money. He argued that because the municipality was not out any money, that the prosecution was overzealous and out of proportion with the natures of his actions. The Illinois Supreme Court disagreed with that and upheld the conviction, holding that there is no exception for even small amounts of money to this law, and the fact that the expenses were on that municipal card at all, even temporarily, was enough to sustain the conviction. So we also touched on this earlier that, and I know from navigating your website that each alderman has a designated email address. This is great. This is your official email address for city business. Use your city address for city business. And on the flip side, use your personal email address for your personal correspondences. Sending emails from your personal account that relate to public business may open up those to disclosure requirements under FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and this could require further inspection of any correspondence sent from that email address. So I think we kind of touched on that earlier. If you start crossing the accounts, you may open up your personal account to exposure or discovery. And just a short note on social media accounts. These are commonplace, obviously, for local officials and local municipalities as well. As an individual, if you maintain your own private pages, you're entitled to do that, and you may post your own personal thoughts and expressions on those pages, but I think we all know that anything you put up online can be found by anyone else pretty much in the public or will be found. So just keep that in mind, that it may be seen by a much larger audience. And then if you are using the Urbana city Facebook page or commenting on public pages, just make sure that you're in line with the guidelines of your city social media policy, which is a great tool that I also know is available based off your website. And just a few final thoughts from me. I hope you will spend some time going through the resources that we have provided you with today to familiarize yourself with the subject matter generally and to get familiar with your own city ordinances. As I mentioned earlier, your city ordinance is the City Officials and Employee Ethics and Political Activity Ordinance. This incorporates many of the same prohibitions as in state statute. And again, to reiterate, rely on your staff to complement your roles and to field questions and to be a resource to you. What I said at the beginning, I'll harken back to now. You are held to a high standard of ethical behavior by your community and the constituents who voted for you. With this information, I hope you now have a better understanding or an adequately refreshed understanding of the requirements that apply to you as an elected official and how you can successfully do your work as an alderman without worrying about any violations. For a final slide on questions, you can ask your city attorney questions, ask your ethics advisor, and ask us at the Illinois Municipal League. Whether you are brand new to local government or a returning member on this council, you never know what issues may arise. I'm sure you know that a lot better than I do. If you have any questions pertaining to ethics standards, have a discussion with your city attorney. That person will be in the best position to weigh the specifics of a lot of inquiries as they relate specifically to the city of Urbana. And of course, please contact IML. We are here to be a resource to you. With that, I'll open it up if anyone has any questions for me, and we'll have a few minutes to do that.
Chandra.
Hi, thank you, Allie, for your presentation. In your scenario about the baseball tickets, is that if you accept them, are you supposed to report that to anyone, or it's just because that's your friend, you've taken these tickets?
In that scenario, it's just, you wouldn't need to report that. It's not a violation because of the nature of your relationship.
And I would just expand on that. So if your best friend just happens to have 4 tickets to the World Series, and the face value of those is $24 a piece, so under the maximum amount allowed, that may be a different situation, because the market value really should be what is considered when you're looking at the value of the item. So if those are selling for $500 on the street corner because it's the Super Bowl or the World Series or some significant, any Illini game, then that needs to be considered. So it's not just the face value of a ticket or the cost of some item. You should look at and consider the market value also. And if you think there's a question about it, or there could be a question, or it was a good friend of yours in high school, but you haven't seen each other in 25 years, probably the best thing is to defer.
Jaya?
Thank you again for the presentation. I was wondering whether either in the materials or if you have any general guidance for those of us who work with nonprofits in our community, so that where we might not be concerned about receiving or giving financial support, but like I said, I know a number of us either have worked with nonprofits or may have current associations with nonprofits who might be coming to either the city or the township board for grants, and whether that's something that's covered somewhere in these materials.
Is it okay if I answer?
Yeah.
I told Ally I wanted to answer some questions, and she's very defensive about it. She said she wanted to answer all of them, so it's okay with you. I'll take this one. That is very common. So obviously you're all engaged in the community and you're involved in things, and that means you're probably affiliated with some nonprofit organization. You might be on the board of a nonprofit organization, or you might even be employed by one. You may be the executive director of an entity. If the public body is awarding a grant to an entity that you are a member of, you have no direct financial benefit. I mean, other than the general membership that is improved by the organization. So that's not a conflict. If you're the executive director of the Boys and Girls Club and they receive an annual award here for their operations, then you would be receiving a direct, at a minimum an indirect, but probably very clearly a direct financial benefit, and you would have a conflict there. If you are wanting to support an organization that you're just aware of or generally involved with or have attended an event to, again, no conflict. Is there a direct, easy to answer, or an indirect, maybe your spouse, partner, or someone in your family, immediate family has a direct benefit, then there is a conflict.
Thank you.
Grace?
Thanks. Who is our ethics advisor?
Michelle Brooks, she's the attorney in the HR department.
Okay, thank you. And I had another two, if that's okay. Is a commission a conflict of interest in our Urbana system? Being on a Urbana City Commission and a council person.
Well, not knowing what your commission structure is, it may be that you are on the commission by virtue of being a member of the council.
Some positions on commissions are by virtue of being a member of the council, like the Farmers Market Advisory Board or the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission or the Library Board. I'm not sure about the sustainability. Were you, well, obviously you weren't appointed as a council member to the Sustainability Commission. So we'll have to look, what we'll look at is the ordinance establishing the commission, because each commission was set up at a different time with different rules related to the membership.
And we're actually dealing, or we have dealt with this issue recently, similarly elsewhere. If there is a conflict and incompatibility in the office, when you are sworn into your new office, you will, by virtue of that, have resigned the previous incompatible office. So, whether you know it or not, because you have now accepted the latter office as your primary. So if you were appointed to the Sustainability Commission and there is a conflict, once you take the oath as an alderman, that would be vacated. But you'll need to check your local stuff on that. Most of the municipal commissions have a role for aldermen, and generally those are advisory, non-voting members, ex officio. And most of those commissions don't take final action. They all roll up through the council. So the council is the one that would expend funds or would adopt policy or something. So I need to refer that back to the city.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
As far as social media accounts, I was wondering about a political social media account, like the city having its account or the mayor, or, having a council person account and sharing things that way, if there was a policy or thoughts on that.
There may be specific provisions in the Urbana ordinance. Generally speaking, if you have the things you want to keep in mind with a designated council person account is that you can't really filter what people are saying on it. So if it's open to comments, you have to keep the good and the bad comments up. You can't filter out based on the content of what people are saying. You could turn them off entirely and have no comment, and just, you would post, your own information on your Facebook or what have you. And then in addition, IML has a social media model policy, and that goes into what a city, it goes into both of those things, what a sitting council person, how they should conduct themselves on their own accounts, and the city as a entity, its own accounts.
Thank you.
James?
Thank you again for your presentation. I think I heard this as you were talking about the statement of economic interest. Everyone sitting here has filed what they need to for this year by virtue of their candidacy, right? We won't have to refile as elected members sworn in.
Correct. For the year up until the next, I believe your statement that you filed will cover your term, and
That
then
was
you have to
in
file it,
anticipation of being elected,
Yeah.
right? Okay, thank you.
because it's based off the previous year's interest.
Not the guidance that the county clerk has
Well,
given
so
us.
the.
I was just gonna say.
Well, it depends on what, so there's a couple of right answers here. So you filed your statement of economic interests when you filed as a candidate. Okay. If you did that during this calendar year, then it satisfies the requirement, because they're required to be filed every year. Now, if you filed it last year because you filed your petitions in December, that's not this year. So you may be required to file another one now. And those are generally by the 1st of May annually. So
So there's an interesting question, since 5 of us are new and won't be sworn in until May 3rd, we're creating the need to file. How is that handled?
Well, so if you had a primary, I'm guessing you filed last December?
November.
November, okay. If the county clerk is advising that you need to do it, then you can do it. There is no harm in doing it. And if you're taking office on May 3rd, you should just, I would say, we don't have the specifics of your exact situation. So I would ask your city attorney to offer an opinion on that, and she or he can get that information from the county clerk. We advise people, I do all the time, you can update your statement of economic interest at any time. You can file it every month if you have something to add. And it's always, can you go back to that slide? It's always okay to overfile. So if you have something that, if you see here, yeah, that's it. So on section 2 or section 6 or section 8, if it says, list an entity, if you think you're going to, or you think you might have, you can always provide more on there. So I tell people the cover-up is always worse than the crime. It's usually depending on the crime, but if you put the information on here, even if you think you don't have to, if you want to release it, then go ahead. And if you want to update your form, you can do that at any time. Because providing more information is never a problem. And that way there can be no question about it. But as far as your own timing, I would suggest that you get an opinion from the city attorney.
Follow up for this one.
Grace?
Is there any group or entity you can talk to about this form? Like, is that through the Illinois Municipal League if people have questions about this form?
Well, the Illinois Secretary of State receives the form, but I don't know that they will give you much advice on it. You could ask the Attorney General's office, or you could ask the municipal attorney for an opinion. If you have a personal issue, you can always also ask your personal attorney. So you can get advice from any number of places. However, the filing entity, which is the Secretary of State, is not going to give you any. They're just going to say, look, all we do is file it. Give it to us, we stamp it, and we send you the receipt back. The county clerk is the same. So I would suggest either getting a legal opinion from the municipal attorney or from your personal attorney, depending on what the issue is.
Yeah, it's just a complicated form.
Well, and if I may, this is my opinion. It is, and so I say this not to disagree with you. It is not a complicated form. It's just a very confusing form. And so that leads to complication. And what we have been asking is for them to improve this form to make it more easily understandable so that you know what you have to fill out. A lot of people fill this out and they put NA, not applicable, on just about all of it, sign it, never think about it again. And then somebody gets in trouble. So I've testified before the Illinois Joint Commission on Ethics Reform for the last year and recently in the last month about this form. So it's going to be improved, and Allie indicated that. We don't know what that's going to be yet, but we're hoping that it'll just be much easier for you to complete. However, the state of Illinois is involved in that process, so let's not hold out too much hope. But that's why I said it's always okay to put more on there. For instance, if you think you're going to have something that's going to exceed it, then put it on there. If you have something that you just want to say that later, hey, I disclosed that, put it on there. Even if there's not a conflict. Don't attach your tax return, but, just use common sense.
And if you hold a liquor license, you must recuse yourself from voting on liquor license applications. Everyone,
Right.
every single one.
Yeah. And that's a local issue because some communities you can hold a certain class license and not other class license. So those are things why it's always good to ask your local attorney. So we're mostly on time. Unless there's any other questions, we'd like to give you just another quick break of about 5 minutes. And then we'll come back with, I'm not sure, our legislative update is next, and then we'll close up shop. So we'll take just 5 minutes, Mayor?
5 minutes, sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Good morning. My name is Mitchell Remmert. I serve as the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Illinois Municipal League. I'm here today to speak with you about our legislative activities and to provide an update on issues that IML is actively involved in at the General Assembly this year. Our legislative department facilitates the advocate portion of IML's mission. At the most basic level, we do this by interacting with legislators, crafting and supporting legislation and policies that are beneficial to municipal governments, and opposing legislation and policies that are harmful. We're missing some slides. Our advocacy is guided by our board-adopted legislative principles and policies, as well as our core values, which are to promote local decision-making, preserve home rule powers, oppose unfunded mandates, preserve the rights of municipalities to decide employee wages and benefits, and protect state shared revenues. These core values are reflected in our state legislative agenda as well as our federal legislative agenda, which we develop in consultation with our policy committees, legislative committee, executive committee, and our board of directors each year. A copy of each agenda is provided in your packet today. I'd like to start with the state legislative agenda, which consists of 12 items whose subject areas range from utilities and meetings to pensions and environment. Each of these items is filed in at least one chamber of the General Assembly, and the agenda includes proposals that would do the following: allow non-home rule communities to impose stormwater utility fees, eliminate or reduce the state sales tax administrative fee, exempt local pass-through revenues from provisions of the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, also known as GATA, permit local authority to conduct remote meetings under the Open Meeting Act without a governor-declared disaster declaration, allow non-home rule communities to implement a sales tax by ordinance or resolution, remove municipal liability in the event of a cyber attack, re-amortize downstate public safety pension funds to 2050, and allow non-home rule municipalities outside of Cook County to implement a motor fuel tax. In addition to our state advocacy, we also directly engage with members of Congress on federal issues that impact our members, and we partner with the National League of Cities, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the Illinois Congressional Delegation to advance the interests of municipalities and shape federal policy. Our goals in this regard are reflected in our 2021 federal legislative agenda, which includes the following items: preserving qualified immunity at the federal level, supporting direct, unrestricted federal aid to communities regardless of size to allow them to respond to and recover from the COVID-19 public health crisis, supporting efforts to craft a fiscally responsible federal transportation and infrastructure funding plan, supporting legislation that would preserve the regulatory rights of states and municipalities with regard to the deployment of small wireless facilities. Now, the development of these agendas begin with our policy committees. We have 6 such committees comprised of municipal officials from across the state and covering different subject areas. These include general governance, land use, public health and safety, personnel and pensions, public work and transportation, and revenue and taxation. Our policy committees include mayors, municipal attorneys, aldermen, trustees, clerks, public works directors, and others. And during the spring legislative session, which runs from January to May, these committees serve as a resource to IML, offering input on various legislative proposals before the General Assembly. Over the summer and fall, these committees help IML staff research and vet ideas from municipal officials that may become part of our next state legislative agenda. Our legislative staff compiles these proposals, which are then further reviewed by our legislative committee and executive committee before being recommended to our board of directors for final approval. Once approved, we have these proposals drafted as legislation. Then we engage with senators and representatives to have them introduced in the Illinois House and Senate. If this is something you think you may be interested in the future, we regularly provide a form each summer and fall to all municipal officials to complete if they so choose. Just let me know if this is something you may be interested in, or keep an eye out for our solicitation, which we provide typically through our e-newsletters. In addition to our legislative agenda, we regularly review every legislative proposal that's filed in the General Assembly to determine whether or not it may be of interest to municipal governments. So far this session, legislators have filed over 7,500 bills, resolutions, and proposed constitutional amendments. And of these, we have taken a position on more than 1,600 items. As you know, or will soon become aware, municipal government is affected by a broad category of issues. We've developed a general list of categories that we use to label legislation that's before the General Assembly. The list on this slide is not an exhaustive list, but it does demonstrate some of the categories that we use. So whether it's zoning, utilities, environment, gaming, pensions, or cannabis, we will take a position on a legislative proposal if it impacts municipal officials or municipal operations. Then on the topic of positions, we utilize 6 different bill positions depending on the nature of the legislation at hand. They're support, oppose, no position, neutral, under review, and bill of interest. I'd like to go through each of these and explain what they mean if you see them on one of our bill review reports. Supporting a bill and opposing a bill is pretty straightforward. We'll support an item if we believe it'll benefit municipal governments. We'll oppose an item if we believe it'll harm municipal governments. We may offer no position on a bill if we believe that it may be of interest to municipal governments, but this may indicate a belief by us that it is unlikely to garner sufficient support for passage, doesn't impose a harm or benefit, or there's no need to take a position at this time. We'll go neutral on legislation if it may have an impact on municipalities, but affects municipalities different based on demographics, geographic location, or other differential issues. In these cases, municipalities may want to elect to convey their individual positions to legislators. We might also take a neutral position if the final bill is the result of negotiations involving IML or other organizations which resulted in objections being resolved towards municipal interests, so neither a support nor opposed position is necessary. Sometimes we'll label a bill as being under review. Specifically, these are items that we are seeking additional information before developing a formal position. We regularly provide updates when we take a formal position on bills or amendments that were previously designated as being under review. And then finally, we might label some items as being a bill of interest. These are bills that we may take a position on at a later point during the legislative session, but have not yet been thoroughly reviewed or reached a designated position. I'd like to pause here. You might be wondering how we take a bill position. As I mentioned, we have our board adopted principles and policies. We can most often determine our position based on that. We regularly gather a small group of IML staff to review all legislation filed in a given day, and we propose preliminary positions. They're then further vetted by IML Executive Director Brad Cole. In some instances, Brad may consult with the IML board president to get additional input before we take a formal position as an organization. And in some extreme cases, we may solicit the input of our entire board of directors. So each item that's filed in the General Assembly can be searched on our website. That's iml.org/bill tracking. This includes bills that we may not have taken a position on. You can search for legislation by topic, by bill number, or the effect it may have, such as if it imposes a mandate, a revenue reduction, or a preemption of municipal authority. Our website also hosts a bill page for each individual bill. For example, the slide before you shows our bill page for our proposal that would exempt municipal pass-through revenues from provisions of GATA. After taking a position on a bill, we will engage directly with legislators and legislative staff to communicate our position. In many cases, we'll offer spoken or written testimony before legislative hearings. We'll also meet with stakeholders who support or oppose issues of concern and draft proposed amendments to the bills in order to remedy any concerns we may have. I would like to note that we have a great working relationship with the City of Urbana state legislators. This includes Representatives Carol Amons and Brad Halbrook, and State Senators Chapin Rose and Scott Bennett. Our advocacy efforts are often supplemented by additional resources, including position papers and fact sheets that we develop on a variety of legislative issues. Your packets today include examples of fact sheets that we've provided as a resource for you. And I'd now like to provide a little information on how you can register your position on a particular bill. When a bill goes before a legislative committee that impacts your community, you can register your support or opposition as an individual or a member of the City Council on the item at the General Assembly's website. That's ilga.gov. So the slide before you, the left image will show you the landing page for the General Assembly website. And this is going to contain a lot of resources about state statutes, special reports, daily schedules, audio and video links, and information on bills. And from this website, you can go to the General Assembly's dashboard. That's the screen on the right. The dashboard will allow you to see committees scheduled for a particular day, week, or month, and the bills that are assigned to that committee. And from there, you can file your position on a particular legislative item. In my experience, state legislators are very responsive to their local communities. Emails and witness slips on legislation are good, but I've found that a call from a local official to a state legislator can make the difference between them supporting and opposing a bill. So you wield a lot of authority in your position, and it can really help our efforts and your efforts before the General Assembly. So now that I've generally explained what we do and how we do it, I'd like to include some subjects that have surfaced at the General Assembly this year. As I previously mentioned, there have been more than 7,500 items introduced, and we're currently tracking more than 1,600. I just want to highlight some of the big issues. Some of the items that are tracked include 304 bills that would impose new mandates on local governments and 118 proposals that would preempt municipal authority. We've included those proposals in two reports that we regularly publish, our proposed state mandates report and our proposed legislation imposing local preemption report. Both of those reports are available on our website. Our general website's iml.org. We also have a legislative page that's iml.org/legislative. You can find both of those reports on there. Since January, both chambers of the General Assembly voted on changes to the procedural rules that allow them to conduct committee hearings virtually. We've participated in many of these committees, offering testimony on several legislative proposals. And one ongoing topic for consideration is the issue of criminal justice reforms. So as many of you are probably aware, in January, the General Assembly met for a final 6-day session. This is commonly known as a lame duck session. And the primary focus of the final days of the 101st General Assembly was a package of legislation developed and introduced by the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. These proposals were divided among 4 legislative subject areas or pillars consisting of economic equity, education, healthcare and human services, and policing reforms. The policing reform pillar was House Bill 3653, and that was signed into law as Public Act 101-652. During the negotiations on this particular bill, we were successful in advocating for the removal of penalties against the local government distributive fund, as well as the preservation of qualified immunity. Despite the passage of this bill, several more proposals have been introduced this year that will affect municipal governments. We've compiled all of our resources that we have on this topic, including fact sheets and a list of introduced bills and more, and that's all at iml.org/policing reforms. This image here shows you the landing page. Like I said, that's a great resource to check out if you're looking for more information on this particular topic. Another critical issue that we are engaged in is downstate public safety pension amortization. We've been involved in this topic for years, working towards the reform and consolidation of downstate public safety pension funds. As you might be aware, municipalities with a population of 5,000 or more and that have a police and fire department are required to create an Article 3 pension fund for police officers and an Article 4 pension fund for firefighters. There's currently more than 650 of these funds in the state, and they cover more than 41,000 public safety pension participants. In 2019, we were successful in advocating for the consolidation of the investment function of these funds. This will improve investment returns, eliminate unnecessary and redundant administrative costs, and reduce the burden on local taxpayers. However, we feel that work remains to ensure the fund's fiscal viability. Under current law, municipal employers are required to contribute to these funds an amount sufficient to bring the total assets of the fund up to 90% of the total actuarial liabilities by the end of municipal fiscal year 2040. And the fact of the matter is that this is the shortest amortization schedule when you compare it to any statewide, state-administered, or Chicago-based fund. So we're pursuing legislation that would extend that amortization schedule to 2050 or later. We've introduced one proposal, that's House Bill 308, sponsored by Representative West, that would accomplish this goal. We think that this will provide much-needed relief to affected communities and provide a responsible path towards funding these pensions. This is another topic where we have a dedicated landing page for resources. That's iml.org/pensions. So feel welcome to check that out as well. Another issue before the General Assembly includes legislation that would mandate the inventory and replacement of lead service lines. These are underground plumbing lines running from the city's water main to private residents that provide water service. And in some communities, some of these lines are made out of lead. We've been engaged with environmental advocacy groups and others for more than 2 years trying to find a path forward on this topic. We maintain that any plan to mandate the replacement of these lines must include a company revenue and take into consideration the administrative capability, fiscal ability, and requisite staffing of affected communities and any current plans that may be in effect. Since the start of this year, we have met weekly with stakeholders on this topic and hope to have an agreed-upon proposal prior to the end of this legislative session. If you're curious, the current proposals under consideration include Senate Bill 556 and Senate Bill 1168, sponsored by Senator Bush, as well as House Bill 3739, sponsored by Representative Robinson. Another critical issue that may be of interest to your community is the Small Wireless Facility Deployment Act. This act regulates the installation of telecommunications hardware that delivers 5G wireless technology. This hardware is typically deployed in municipal rights-of-way on municipal infrastructure such as utility poles. This act originally took effect on June 1st, 2018, and is set to expire or sunset on June 1st of this year. And due to the impact of the legislation on municipalities throughout the state, we believe that it's critical that any future extensions of this act protect municipal interests. So to that end, IML is advocating for greater authority for municipal officials when it comes to requiring this hardware be located on alternative structures and ensuring that the equipment meets or exceeds all applicable safety regulations. While there's nearly 12 proposals filed on this topic, IML is continuing to meet with industry representatives to try to find a path forward. And then finally, another outstanding issue at the General Assembly is the topic of a state budget. So this would bring us to a 4-letter word you can actually use at the dinner table. It was mentioned earlier, LGDF, which is the abbreviation for the Local Government Distributive Fund. As you may know, during his annual budget address, Governor Pritzker recommended cutting the local share of the Local Government Distributive Fund by an additional 10% when compared to last year's distribution. This is a designated local portion of the income tax revenues distributed to cities and counties on a per capita basis. In your packet today includes our fact sheet on this critical funding source. Now, I need to note that the General Assembly still has to approve this proposal, and we are adamantly opposed to any further reductions to LGDF, and will continue to advocate against legislation that would enact this reduction. This is just a few of the topics that IML is actively involved in. We have many more resources on our legislative page. As I mentioned, that would be iml.org/legislative. And as a municipal official, you can sign up to receive our weekly e-newsletters, our e-newsletter, the State House Briefing, which provides timely updates about what is occurring at the Capitol. Other newsletters you can sign up for is our monthly Federal Focus and our monthly Legal Bulletin. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I'd just like to note that if you have a legislative inquiry going forward, you can send that via email at imllegislation@iml.org. Thank you.
Questions on legislation? James?
Thanks. That was a great presentation. I see that I have a book here on home rule versus non-home rule, but the two items that they're talking about extending home rule-like powers to non-home rule municipalities for taxing purposes, how much is going to be left of differentiating home rule from non-home rule if they keep extending those capabilities to the non-home rule groups?
Is it okay if I answer this? Okay. So, just a slight correction to the question. They're not actually giving they're not actually giving home rule powers to non-home rule communities. We're asking them to. So they really haven't been affording that many. On the motor fuel tax, we requested non-home rule communities to have the ability to adopt a local motor fuel tax by the city council. Statewide, they only gave it to the municipalities in Cook County. So, that's a whole nother issue. That's one example where they did, but we're trying to get it statewide. I guess to the question, there doesn't need to be a distinction. We would prefer that every community is home rule because it allows the local community to make more decisions, the corporate authorities to make more decisions, have more authority. So we actually would like to see more non-home rule communities to have home rule powers. The way they can do that is statutorily to allow allow non-home rule communities to do something. The big difference between home rule and non-home rule, and you've seen this in whatever was probably advertised for Savoy, their question recently, so I'm sure you probably heard some of that. The difference is that home rule communities can do anything that this General Assembly hasn't said they can't. And non-home rule can only do what the General Assembly has said they can. So there are some things that we think non-home rule communities should be able to do also. So to your question, if there's more that's given to non-home rule, we see that as a good thing. It doesn't take away from home rule.
All right, thank you.
JF?
So thank you again for another very informative presentation. I just had a question of if we as elected officials have a disagreement with the policies that are being put forward as priorities for IML and the legislation, you know, the activism or the lobbying that you all are doing, what does that feedback process look like to be able to say, hey, I don't agree with this direction that you all are advocating for?
Just right there, you can call us, you can tell us, you can stop us, you can email, and that happens. So just yesterday, I responded to a North Shore suburban community in Cook County that asked about 3 bills, saying, why are you opposed to these bills? And I provided the explanation, which for all 3 of them was, it's not what you think it is. So there's more to it. It's got a nice title, but the real issue is a lot deeper. And so we will take a position, and by our board adopted policies and principles, maybe to support or oppose something, as Mitchell went through, that is on a statewide basis. If we oppose something that the city of Urbana thinks is a great idea, you're more than welcome to support it. And that's fine, and it's okay to have the differing opinions. What we're trying to look out for is the statewide perspective. Now, sometimes in these issues that I just answered the question about in this email I got, are things that the community said, well, we're all for this. We think this is a great idea. And in fact, we already do this. Why would you be opposed to it? We're not opposed to the idea, and we welcome and encourage you to do that if you wish to. What we're opposed to is the mandate that you have to do it. So if Urbana wants to adopt a policy on something, great, and we are behind you 100% on that. But if the General Assembly tells you you have to, we might be opposed to that. And so if you have a disagreement, just let us know, ask the question. In fact, we have an issue that's out there, and I'll touch on it. It's a gardening bill. And, you know, who doesn't like gardening? I like tomatoes, and that's really about all I like. But there's a piece of legislation that's moving to advance gardening. How could we oppose it? Well, we are opposed to it, and we're very opposed to it. Not because of the gardening, but because it eliminates your authority in local zoning, and it eliminates your authority to regulate anything having to do with gardening. So maybe I could build a 3-story greenhouse structure in my front yard. But, you know, that's probably not a good thing. So we have to look deeper into the issue. And if we've opposed it for, there's a reason. But if any community has a difference of opinion, they're welcome to have that. We ask them to tell us so that we do know. Maybe we need to change our opinion.
Any other questions?
Follow-up. Is email the preferred communication on that, or you said to call? And
Either's fine. I mean, we take, you know, inquiries. However, you can go onto our website, and the page that Mitchell talked about, you can put the bill number in our search box in general, and it'll pull up what he showed you. You can send an email through our inquiry on our website, or through any of our individual email addresses, which are listed on our bios, and, or you can call. If you send us an email, we probably will be able to give you some reference points back. You know, we may be able to give you the bill page, or maybe send you some detail, but however you want to do it is fine.
Thanks.
So I'm the closer here, but we're gonna touch on just wrapping up the legislative piece, and then also concluding the whole morning. Legislative issues are very important, and that's a lot of what we do that is forward-facing. So you'll get a lot of information from us. If you don't want our newsletter, you know, tell us you don't want it. We'll take you off the list. You have to get added onto it, so you're not going to get it automatically. So that form in your packet, if you want to get the stuff, just fill it out, and we'll send it to you. And, you know, it's very informative, but as Mitchell noted, it helps if you talk to your legislators. And even if you don't know an issue, if you're talking to a legislator, you could be like this LGDF. I don't know where LGDF is right now, but we support IML's position. That helps too. And know on that, all we're going to be doing is trying to get you more money. So that's an easy one to support our position. But please be engaged if you can with your local legislators. Now, to the question that was asked, you might have an individual position that's different from your city council's position on something too. So make sure that if you are speaking about something for or against it, you're indicating if it's for or against because of the city or because of yourself, just so you don't get caught on something. And the mayor is usually the spokesperson on those types of issues, so you can talk with her. So to wrap up this morning, you know, this is an exciting moment for you because you're newly elected officials or re-elected officials. Some of the topics we talked about are not really exciting, but they are the law and they're very important. The materials we provided to you are significant. You don't have to go through them all tonight, but if you happen to, and in the middle of the night you've got a question, just give me a call. I'm probably sitting at my desk. So if you have questions about any of these things we've talked about, you can send us an email or call us, and we'll be glad to walk through them with you. This is a real pleasure for us to be able to present to you specific to the city of Urbana because we usually present these in general, and so we were able to tailor this a little bit more to Urbana. But the issues are going to be faced by municipal officials everywhere across the state. The role of the council as the legislative body is important to keep in mind. So you are policy setters at the top level. You are here to consider issues, to adopt budgets, expend funds, approve and reject policies, and then let the administration carry them out. And the administration in most cases is the mayor and the administrator, who has the authority over the rest of the government. So this table is your workplace. Use it effectively. If you have issues, bring them up, talk about them, debate them, adopt or reject them, and then allow the staff and the administration to go carry them out. That's your role as the legislative body. And if you provide for that, then I think you will have a better relationship with the staff will have a better relationship with you, and you'll have a better relationship with the community because everybody will understand everybody's role. And you'll each of those individuals and groups involved will be able to effectively do their jobs. Each community is different, so there are local nuances to everything. So look up, you know, if you have a question like, well, he said this, okay, but it may be a little different here in your local ordinances. So make sure you ask a question if it could have some local impact. Public meetings are for the public. It's important to remember that. Sometimes you'll get people that want to give their full 4 minutes of public comment, and that's okay. You're here to represent them. You are their representative. And this is their meeting, actually. This is the public's meeting. You're just empowered to do their business there. And so sometimes it's easy. I was in elected office locally for nearly 20 years. It's easy to really not appreciate people who come and talk and go on and say the same things over again and maybe say things that aren't factually correct or make accusations. Just take it in as a part of the process and use it to be able to help them maybe later, know what their concerns are and serve them to the best of your ability. We have a survey. It's that green sheet I mentioned at the beginning of the program today. I would love for you to fill that out. I'll take it. Our staff is going to collect the materials that they brought, and they're going to take off. I'm going to join you for lunch and stay and be glad to answer any additional questions you have as a part of that. And just in closing, I want to thank you again for the opportunity, and I want to congratulate each of you for the role that you will soon be undertaking and look forward to working with you. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Brad. I just want to thank once again Brad, Cassie, Patrick, Allie, and Mitchell for being here on a Saturday morning. We really appreciate it. It's the first time I've experienced training like this, and I think it's been, and I've learned a lot this morning. So Thank you for the resources. One thing I didn't highlight was the IML's role in providing information over the past year related to the pandemic. We were deluged with information on a daily basis, all day long, as I'm sure some of you were in your jobs, and IML provided very good summaries, updates, and really helped hone in on some of the most important pieces of information that we needed to know, particularly keeping up with the governor's emergency orders, which came fast and furious the first few months. So we were always a half step behind, but that's where we had to be. So it was extremely helpful, and I appreciate that as much. And I'll reiterate, they are open to your calls, your questions, and are very, very responsive, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
So we have, please fill out your surveys. We have your boxed lunches in the back of the room, and we will reconvene promptly at 1 o'clock so we can stay on schedule.